Good evening, everyone. It is 5 o'clock, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the February 19th Fish and Wildlife Board meeting. My name is Michael Bancroft. I'm the Orange County Board member, acting chair tonight, while our fearless leader, Brad Furland, is away, but he is here remotely. So before we get started on anything, we'd like to make one update to the agenda. We just need to make two date changes. So on agenda item number 3, it now says 2024 migratory game bird season preview, should say 2025. And as well as agenda item number 5, it should say 2025 moose season recommendations. Do we need a vote to change that or no? Okay, since we changed it before. All right, just a few housekeeping items before we get to the agenda. Since we are hybrid, we have a big screen here and folks joining remotely. So if you're here remotely, either on Zoom or by phone, please keep yourself muted unless you're speaking during the public comment period. And we only have so much room on the screen. So if you are not a board member or department staff, please keep your video off so we can keep the space on the screen for board members. And secondly, we do have microphones around here in this room. They're always live, and this video is being recorded, so just be aware of that. So first up, introductions. I'd like to have the board members introduce themselves. We'll start here in the room. Neil, go ahead.
Neil Hogan, Bennington County.
Brian Bailey, Washington County.
Paul Noel, Orleans County.
Richard Craig, Lamoille County. Bob Patterson, Addison County.
Nick Burnham, Windsor County. Jay Sweetie, Franklin County.
West Island, Grand Isle County.
And online, we'll start with Brad.
Brad Furland, Caledonia County.
Allison Frazier, Chittenden County.
Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
David, you must be on mute.
I am David Dean, Windham County.
Linda, are you muted as well?
Linda Hook, Essex County.
Thank you. Now I'll hand it over to the commissioner to introduce the department.
Great. Hi, my name is Andrea Shortsleeve. I am the commissioner of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'll start with down on the far end, Abigail, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Abigail Connolly, Principal Assistant Commissioner. Hannah Smith, General Counsel.
Sean Fowler, Major for the Warden Service.
John Austin, Director of the Wildlife Division.
Andrew Boucher, Waterfowl Biologist. David Salzville, Program Manager. Nick Forden, Interior Biologist. Dave Taddy, Detective Sergeant.
Sergeant Jenna Reed with the Warden Service. Great. And then on the screen, Eric.
Yeah, Eric Palmer, Director of Fisheries.
Go ahead, Allie.
Allie Thomas, Director of Outreach.
Great. And then Tony.
Tony Mercula, Upland Game Bird Biologist.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving to the first item on the agenda, approval of the previous meeting minutes from January 15th. So board members, you should have received this by email, but they're also available on the department website. We have a motion.
I'll make a motion to second that.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the meeting minutes as written, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All right, you guys have it. Okay, public comments. So this is a working board meeting between the board and the department, but we also do like to hear from the public beyond what we hear outside of this meeting. So we have an agenda item to provide a moment for folks to speak for up to 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be pertaining to anything on this agenda. You can ask questions, give feedback, criticism, praise, whatever you'd like. First, we will start with those here in the room, and then we will move online, and lastly to those who are here joining us by phone, if there's any. We don't have the speaker list, but I do know, just so I don't have to butcher anyone's name, we'll just go around the room. And if you'd like to speak, please stand up. Please state your name and town of residence. Those of you who are in here, you can either stand there or stand in front of the board, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. And again, this is not a back and forth. If you do have something that does need a response, you can catch up with any of us during the dinner break after the meeting, or if you need a written response, please email us and we will get you that response shortly. So first up in the room here, would you like to speak?
Hi, my name is Cassie Birdie Shaw. I'm the Vermont State Director for Animal Wellness Action, and I'm here to listen tonight, but I just thought I would share who I am and pass it on.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, we are timing, so if you approach the 2 minutes, I will do my best to politely ask you to wrap it up and move on so we can hear from everyone. You weren't even close to the 2 minutes. You were good, Cassie. Rob?
Good. Hey, everybody. Rod Coronado, Orange County, Orangetown, live and work at Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary. Want to apologize in advance. I'm going to dip out of the meeting to go to the State House to help welcome the Abenaki delegation that's visiting today. But I did want to just offer some reflections on some testimony I've heard at the House Committee on Environment this legislative session. In addition to the Wildlife Diversity Program of the department making an awesome presentation recently, on the 6th, there was a presentation on cougar restoration in Vermont and New England as a whole. And it's available online on the YouTube channel for the Committee on Environment if you want to check it out. It sadly kind of like ends with recognition that the network of roads that exist in New England are always going to keep cougars from successfully recolonizing New England. They say it's like an 84% chance that they'll be killed on the roads before they even reach New England. If you look at a map of suitable habitat that does exist, there's the northern New York State area and southern Maine, and northern New Hampshire and Vermont is kind of like sliced in half by Interstate 89 and 91. So it again speaks to me of the overall need for wildlife crossings and connectivity to build resilience in all species, not just extirpated species. But I especially like the attention towards the cougar as we think about other levers we can pull in getting our numbers down for deer populations in places where licensed sales aren't doing the job. So I'm just going to end there and say that, again, I support all efforts by the department to work on connectivity, especially wildlife crossings for aquatic and terrestrial species. 1,500 culverts in the state, only 6% of them passable to brook trout. I think we owe wildlife a lot more. Thanks, everybody.
Chris Pritchard, I live in Hallett, Vermont. I represent Rutland Bennington District, which is the towns of Hallett, Middletown Springs, Rupert, portion of Wells, and Timmins. I sit on the Environment Committee in the State House, and I've been a hunters education instructor for about 35 years, active in my local 4-H shooting sports program. And I want to just say how much I appreciate the mission statement of the Fish and Wildlife, what the board members do for our wildlife, and I want to be an advocate for this department. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to bring Martin home all this literature because he's at home with a broken leg.
Oh no. No. Ouch. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fred Schroeder. I live in Bristol. I'm here to speak against the panfish regulations that are ahead of us. I'm going to read some stuff tonight. Just some of it's hypothetical and some of it's real life. A small group of local waterfowl hunters is pushing for complete closure of the mallard take for the 2025 duck season based upon their personal experiences and wanting to grow the population for the next season. What if, for you tonight, Vermont waterfowl biologists believe those local duck hunters recommended the daily mallard limit be 0 for 2025. When questioned, these biologists told you they had no scientific data that mallard populations were in trouble, or simply reacting to the wishes of a few local hunters. How would you vote? What if a small but vocal group of Vermont deer hunters who believe there simply were not enough deer in Chittenden County, where deer and car collisions were high and damage to important wildlife habitat was evident, and they petitioned Vermont wildlife biologists to eliminate the take of does in that zone? What if before you tonight, Vermont deer biologists believe this local group of deer hunters had recommended no doe permits in Chittenden County be handed out in 2025? When questioned by the Fish and Wildlife Board, the deer biologists told you they had no data to support the claim that doe permits should be eliminated and were simply appeasing a small group of deer hunters who wanted to see more. What if a small group of local fishermen from the southeast part of the state, empowered by social media, believed that panfish populations were imperiled in their local waters and believed that overfishing fueled by commercial fishing was the cause? These local fishermen petitioned state fisheries biologists to limit the take of panfish. What if state fisheries biologists drafted regulations to limit the take of panfish on inland waters and classified black and white crappie as a non-native fish to most Vermont waters as a game fish, which prevents them from being sold? And what if these same fisheries biologists presented these regulations to the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Board for a decision? And when asked if they had any data to support their claim, the director of fisheries, Eric Palmer, told you that they had no data. How would you vote? Thank you.
My name is Jordan Schroeder, Bristol, Vermont. I just wanted to say that the presentation given by the Fish and Wildlife last meeting was very biased against commercial fishing. And it was, as stated by Eric Palmer, there was no data, no scientific data to prove any of that. It's all based on social, opinion. And and I'm guessing everybody heard David talk last meeting about how it went against the North American model, conservation model. Sure, goes against it. But we already sell fur from trapping. We already sell, deer hide, a whole bunch of stuff. So we're already going against that. But the North American conservation model says we also have to have scientific data to prove our laws, which we don't. So we're still going against it. So, it's a little wonky there. But I guess my last thing I want to say is, the decision this board is going to make is they're going to, it could destroy a family-owned business that has been around for the past 50 years in the state of Vermont, and it could destroy many other family-owned business. And I guess my last thing is, the warden talked about their fist fights over black crappie at Charcoal Creek and the Albrecht Bridge. I can tell you right now, I fish that place all the time, have a camp in North Hero. There's no fights there. There's no fights. And, competition, it's no different than opening day in Arkansas where there's fist fights over guys trying to get, this is the best spot flooded timber. No different. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mike Covey, Williamstown. I'm just here. Dave Lasky. I'm the ambassador for Hunt of a Lifetime for the state of Vermont. I'm here just to answer any questions you may have. It's the topic of moose hunting for Hunt of a Lifetime comes up. Thank you.
Thank you. There. All right, moving online. If you'd like to speak, please raise your little fake hand, and Abigail will call on you. Seeing none, anyone joining by phone?
There's one person.
The person who's here by phone, if you'd like to speak, please unmute and introduce yourself. You have 2 minutes if you'd like to speak. All right, thank you, everyone. So moving on to the 2025 Migratory Game Bird season preview preliminary approval. Now you'll notice this plus the next three agenda items do have either a preliminary approval or a first vote. So as a reminder to those in the public and those here on the board, whether new or experienced, we do have at least 2 other votes after all of these votes to hash things out. So without further ado, I will kick it over to the commissioner.
Great. I'm gonna directly introduce Andrew Bowden. He's our migratory game bird biologist. Andrew.
So I'm gonna go through some population data and then I'll jump right into the seasons and kind of get through this pretty quick to give Nick plenty of time for his topics. So the migratory game birds are managed at a flyway level by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with input from the states and other stakeholders. There's 4 flyways within the U.S. Pacific Flyway, Central Flyway, Mississippi Flyway, and Atlantic Flyway, and Vermont falls within the East Atlantic Flyway, along with 17 other states and provinces. So how do we understand waterfowl populations? We understand waterfowl populations through a series of breeding surveys to obtain the best estimate for waterfowl abundance. There are 2 main survey areas within the east. The Atlantic Flyway Breeding Waterfowl Survey area, which is done by foot in the northern states, and then the Eastern Waterfowl Survey area, which is the traditional survey area, which is done by air, which includes the Canadian provinces and Maine. So in 2024, duck breeding populations, the habitat conditions range from fair to excellent. It's a big range, but it's a huge area, so there's a lot of variation in the habitat. Mallard population in the Atlantic Flyway decreased by 4% from 2023, but it remains that should be increased. It increased, it went back up, but it still is 9% below the long-term average. Oh wait, no, sorry. Mallard population did decrease. The total duck breeding population increased by about 5% and is 4% below the long-term average. Vermont waterfowl population, we don't have an actual estimate of the population, but based on banding efforts and our local waterfowl surveys, resident goose populations were stable. We had a pretty good year of banding, banded over 700 geese, and then duck banding was very successful. We put out over 1,300 new bands at 4 banding sites in Champlain Valley. So Canada geese are broken into 3 main subpopulations that occur in Vermont. The Atlantic population, which is up on the Ingava Peninsula and Hudson Bay, and migrates through most of Vermont. And then the North Atlantic population, which breeds on Newfoundland and Labrador, and migrates through the Connecticut River Valley. And then the resident population, which is everything basically below central Quebec, which we have year-round and nest in Vermont. So the Atlantic population of Canada geese, which is the primary migratory population that comes through Vermont, was estimated to be around 89,000 breeding pairs this year, which is below, which is a decrease again from last year. We get a lot of this information going along with the surveys from hunter harvest estimates, which there's 3 main methods of data collection. The harvest information program, which is every time you buy a waterfowl license or stamp, you have to fill out a series of questions on how you did the previous year. And the parts collection survey, where a random selection of hunters are asked to submit wings or tail feathers from geese. The wings are from ducks of every bird that they harvest. And then hunter diaries, which is just asking hunters to basically fill out when, what days, and how many birds they killed each year. So waterfowl hunting harvest estimates and comparisons. In 2023, we had about 3,600 active duck hunters, which is fairly consistent over the last 20 years. Duck stamp sales have stayed very consistent for that same time period. And the average number of ducks per hunter per year was about 7.2. So we will have controlled hunts again this year at Mud Creek and Dead Creek. Mud Creek will be Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays, with the first two being by lottery. And the Dead Creek will be Tuesdays, Thursdays, and one Friday for a youth day. And we are currently discussing amongst the controlled hunt team of how to improve these opportunities for folks and kind of get more interest as lottery applicants have been decreasing for the last several years. So Vermont has 3 waterfowl hunting zones. The Connecticut River Zone, Lake Champlain Zone, which includes part of New York and is set by Vermont. The Interior Zone, which is entirely within Vermont and set by us. And then the Connecticut River Zone, which is part of New Hampshire's Inland Zone and is set by New Hampshire. So this year we conducted a new waterfowl hunter survey. It had been about 10 years since our last survey was conducted. And it's one part that I thought was really interesting and kind of exciting to see within this survey is that it was a very even spread of number of for people that had been hunting a variety of years, and the most had actually been hunting for 5 years or less. So that means there's an uptick in interest in waterfowl hunting, and we have a lot of newer people getting into the sport. So for woodcock seasons, the federal framework allows us to have season length of 45 days between the 13th and January 31st. So we selected, or our recommendation is to have 45 days from September 27th, which is the opening day of small game, to November 10th with 3 bird daily bag limit. Snipe will match woodcock with 8 per day. For the early resident Canada goose season, we're allowed 25 days between September 1st and the 25th, and a limit of up to 15 per day. Our recommendation is 25 days between September 1st and 25th at 8 per day in Lake Champlain and Interior Zone. Since New Hampshire sets the Connecticut River Zone, they have it in statute that can only be at 5 per day. For the migratory Atlantic population Canada goose season, we're allowed 30 days and 1 bird per day between October 10th and February 5th. Our recommendation is to hold the season from October 11th to November 9th, 1 bird per day. The late resident Canada goose season, which we're allowed 77 days between December 1st and February 15th, with a daily bag limit of 5 per day. For each species, you're only allowed a total of 107 days. So the remaining days after youth days, the early resident season, and then the migratory season is 50 days. So our recommendation is to have 50 days from December 1st to January 19th with a daily bag limit of 5 per day. For snow geese, we're allowed 107 days between October 1st and March 10th, daily bag limit of 25 per day. Our recommendation is to have the season from October 1st to December 31st, and then February 26th to March 10th, and then the conservation order would be, which is not technically a hunting season, it's a conservation order, would be from March 11th to April 25th. The daily bag limit for the regular season would be 25 per day and 15 per day during the conservation order. That is set in statute. For Brant, we're allowed 30 days between September 23rd and January 31st with 1 per day. So our recommendation is from October 11th to November 9th and 1 per day. For youth, we're allowed 2 days within 2 weeks of either end of the allowable hunting days. So our recommendation is to hold our youth weekend on September 27th and 28th. So for duck seasons, another, when surveyed, hunters preferred to have had a slight preference for opening seasons the first weekend of October, in both the Lake Champlain and the interior zone. But due to other conflicting responses, the only way to really make it all work is to actually have the season open the second weekend of October, as you'll see in my next recommendations. The preferred month to have the most days in, both in the Lake Champlain and the interior zone, was October, then followed by November, with the least number of people preferring to have the most days in December. For Lake Champlain zone, people preferred to have a split season, and in the interior zone, people preferred to have a straight season. So if the people preferred largely to have the season end at the end of December, granted that we're only allowed to have 60 days in a season, this makes setting the seasons really complicated. If you're going to have days in October, November, and still end at the end of December. So for duck hunting seasons, we're allowed 60 days between September 21st and January 31st, with a daily value limit of 6 per day. Our recommendation is to have the season in the interior zone from October 11th to December 9th, which is a straight season. And then in the Lake Champlain zone from October 11th to November 23rd, and then close until December 13th to December 28th. Mergansers is a separate bag limit, and that would be the recommendation is to have that as the same dates as the duck season. Falconry season is open. Our recommendation is to have that open at any time there is a waterfowl season. So falconry season is open at any time that the waterfowl season is open for that species. So moving on, our next steps after the board's initial vote tonight, we'll host 2 public meetings. On March 11th is going to be in Whitehall, New York, and then on March 13th will be in our Essex Junction office. Both meetings start at 6:30. Then after I compile the recommendations or the public comments, and I'll make a final recommendation to the board will vote on that, and then that has to be submitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service by April 30th, so it can be posted to the Federal Register, and then can release the syllabus. And this year, given some uncertainty with federal regulations and Nexus, there's a chance that if the federal government doesn't get their process settled, and it doesn't get submitted in time, that the early Canada goose season may not happen. It's never happened before, but it's just a chance. Last year they were 2 days away from not having a season, and they got it in just in time. But so it's just with everything going on, just something to be aware of, that there's always that potential chance. We don't have control over that. So just something I wanted to mention.
I think my question is pertaining to the early resident season. So it seems like every species you followed the federal framework for bag limit, except the early resident Canada goose season. Why is that?
So when the resident season was established, this department had kind of targeted a say acceptable, but a good number of resident Canada geese, and we've hit that target, and 8 per day seems to be keeping it at that level without letting it increase or decrease. So we've kind of reached that our population target.
So, I'm just asking out of ignorance. I'm at Brant season. Does Brant, I noticed in table 5, you don't have Brant estimated harvest. Are there Brant in Vermont that are?
Yes, we do, not for a long period of time. We get about, there is quite a few that migrate through the Lake Champlain corridor. And they're come through for about a week or two. There's not here very, very long, and that's usually late October, early November. This year I saw a flock of 100 the opening weekend of duck season. And every year they actually, the Virginia biologist just texted me a few days ago saying that since 1999, 10 Brant bands had been shot and recovered in Vermont, which is pretty significant amount for not having a wintering Brant area.
So how many are we talking about in terms of a harvest? Just general idea.
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'd say maybe 10 to 15 a year. It's pretty low. They're quote unquote easy species to hunt because they decoy very easily, but not very many people target them in this area. When you get down to New Jersey and places where they're wintering, people target them and they're pretty successful at it.
Question. Andrew, how many people respond to your survey when you ask them when they would see when they would like to see the season start?
That was, I believe, 800 were 1,300 started filling out the survey, and 800 and something were eligible to complete the entire survey. It's pretty good representative sample.
Not necessarily to pertain to this, but I did notice on one of your graphs, why was there not a spike in participation during 2020 in bird hunting, where we saw it in every other type of hunting?
That's a very good question. Don't necessarily know.
I can make some kind of guesses. Is that it takes a little more to get into waterfowl hunting, and generally you're mentored by somebody. Locations, availability, and it's also a little more expensive when you start buying something a year. So, and what was nice with his survey that was done is that age bracket is nice and even. So I think that just helps keep the flow of people coming in.
Definitely. Any other questions? Thank you, Andrew.
Have to do a straw vote, or how's that?
Yep. So we'll do a straw vote. All right. So we'll just look for we can't really do raising of hands. We'll look for a raising of hands. This is a straw vote to approve the 2025 migratory game bird season as presented by the department. Quick question: do we still need a first and a second when it's a straw vote? Probably not.
Probably not.
Okay.
That's a good question.
All right. All those in favor of the game bird recommendation by the department, please raise your hand. All right. Looks like it's unanimous.
I think
That was his raising his hand.
Linda
and Allison.
Linda, there's her
okay.
hand raised. And there's Allison. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So as in next steps, when are the public hearings?
March 11th and 13th.
March 11th, 13th. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to proposed turkey rule changes, first votes. So I'll kick it over to the commissioner once again.
Great. And I will introduce Tony Makula, who's virtual. Oh, and,
I can help.
oh, okay. Well, Tony is our turkey project lead but in the room, David Sosville is our wildlife management program manager. Yeah. So, pick it up to you guys.
All right, Tony, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here.
What I could do is I could just read through the change in the rule part of your packet under 10 VSA 22. They added in, or we added, suggesting adding in, a person hunting under the section shall obtain a turkey license as provided under 10 VSA 4252. And that, and portion of that was permit was removed. And historically, it was back in the early 1970s. They had a lottery system and they're given permits. So it's just kind of cleaning it up, saying that they need a hunting license to do this. It's not a permit anymore. It's not a lottery system. So that portion was added and portion was removed. I think it was. It was 3.5 was removed. Moving on through to the dates, what it's recommended is we're trying to match the fall archery season for turkeys to open with the archery season for deer in the fall. So start at the same time, October 1st, instead of starting the first Saturday in October, so that when the deer season was moved to October 1st, you didn't bring the turkey season with it, the archery season. So we're recommending that we begin the fall turkey archery season October 1 and let it run through to the Friday, including that Friday, prior to the regular deer season. And then that would end of the archery portion of turkeys. Then on 5.5, again, that's just clarifying that we want them to obtain a turkey hunting license. Move down to 7.1, the change in the rule is that any person 15 and under can hold a free youth turkey hunting weekend shall be entitled to take wild turkey during those days. So it's very simple, just trying to clean that up and match up the turkey season prior to the regular deer season.
Can you speak once more again on the effect extending the archery season will have on the harvest?
That was the presentation in December's board meeting. And Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was minimal, maybe 1 or 2 birds per town was going to be the increase that was anticipated.
Yeah, currently most wildlife management units, I'm sorry, that's my bird. Most wildlife management units are already having single digit harvest for turkey archery. So we're expecting only a slight increase in what's already a pretty low harvest. So most WMUs, single digit increase in the yearly harvest.
Majority of the annual harvest occurs during the spring season. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Rifling through this. David? No, okay. All right, so we're looking for a first vote here. This does require a motion.
So moved.
All right. David?
Second.
Brian, was that you?
Yeah.
All right, we have a first and second. Any more discussion?
I'm assuming that's a motion to adopt the changes as just explained, Title 10, Section 22.
Did you hear that, David?
Yes, that was my motion.
Okay. Second. All right, we'll do this by roll call. Yeah. Oh, I don't have my list here. I know everyone's name for the most part. You got it. Thank you. All right, yeses to approve. First up, Brian Bailey,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Brad,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Neil,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Robert,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. All right, first vote passes. Thank you, Tony. David? Moving right along to the 2025 moose season recommendation. This is once again a preliminary approval. Commissioner, take it away.
Great. I'd like to introduce Nick Fortin, our moose and deer project lead.
Try to move through this quickly as well, since most of you have seen this. Hopefully you've had a chance to also read the recommendation. It is the same exact recommendation we gave last year, same number of permits. So quick review. I think you all saw the harvest report as well, but real quick, last fall, archery season, pretty normal success, about 52%, 12 moose, all bulls. Regular season was, let's call it challenging. We had record low success rates in both either sex and antlerless only permits. Some of you were on hunts. We could not have made worse moose hunting weather during our regular season last year. It was 70 degrees for a good portion of it. It was awful. So that's really probably, maybe not entirely, but most of the reason those success rates were low. But otherwise, so we were well short of our target harvest. We were expecting about 94 total moose, and we got 62. So well short, but hopefully we get better weather this year. So moose population objectives. We have objectives for every WMU that we consider moose range within Vermont. Most of the state, 0.5 moose per square mile. We're reevaluating whether that's realistic. Northeast Kingdom, higher population objective because better habitat, historically higher moose numbers. Here's where we stand currently. This is a little confusing, but the blue lines are our target population in each WMU. Orange line is our hunting threshold. So every WMU, if we're below 75% of the target, we're not going to hunt moose. Right, that's set in the big game plan. You can see the only ones that are close to or exceed our target is WMUs E1 and E2. I will point out that WMUC this year did pop above the hunting threshold. The way we have it in the big game plan, it has to be 2 consecutive years above the hunting threshold before we'll consider permits. So if it stays there, maybe next year we'll talk about permits and see, maybe, but not right now. So we're still just E. We look at this on a map, you know, each dot represents one estimated moose. I don't actually know where every single moose in Vermont is. That'd be cool if we did, but it would look something like this if we did. Just demonstrating how much higher that density is up in E compared to the rest of Vermont. And that's why we're only hunting in E, not hunting anywhere else. Still, about half of all the moose in Vermont live in E, up in that tiny little northeast corner. The reason there aren't moose in most of Vermont, or aren't as many moose in most of Vermont, few reasons. Big one is brainworm. So brainworm is a common parasite carried by white-tailed deer. Some places have estimated like 75% of deer carry brainworm. So areas where you have more deer, brainworm's more common on the landscape.
moose infections with brainworm are common enough that it limits the size of the moose population. Brainworm is often fatal to moose, not always. Some moose can actually become infected and then survive. But it's often fatal, and if enough moose get it, that limits your population size. So obviously areas with more deer have more brainworm. Most of Vermont has enough deer for brainworm's a limiting factor. The other huge factor in most of Vermont is just we don't have enough young forest habitat to support any more moose than we currently have. Moose are big animals and they eat nothing but leaves and twigs, and it takes a lot of leaves and twigs to feed a moose. You need young forest habitat with a lot of that browse within reach of a moose. Most of our forests do not have that. So we don't have the habitat to support more moose, even if we didn't have the parasite issues and everything else. The exception is E, which is part of this larger core range in the Northeast, extends through northern New Hampshire and most of Maine. That region has much higher moose densities. It's the coldest part of our region, longest, snowiest winters. A northern species at the southern edge of its range really likes cold weather, so they do best in the coldest part of our region. But the main reason there are so many more moose in that area is almost entirely commercial timberland. Logging is extensive and intensive, and it creates a ton of excellent moose habitat. There's so much forage for moose that they do exceptionally well. And that is why the area supports such high densities of moose. In fact, some of the highest densities in all of North America. This is a map of the range of moose in North America, color-coded by the density of moose. It's in moose per square kilometer, so don't try to translate that. But what I want to point out is there's this band, of oranges and reds across the continent, higher densities. I wish I could do this all on one map, and I'm stealing these from a paper published a few years ago now. This just focuses on those higher density ones and recolors them. What I want to point out is, so the red areas on this map, which includes WMUE in northeastern Vermont, the only places in North America where moose exist at 1 per square mile or greater. There is a higher density of moose in WMUE than most of Canada and most of Alaska. It is objectively a high density moose population. And it's that high density that leads to problems with winter ticks. Winter ticks, a unique species of tick. It's not the deer tick or dog tick most people are familiar with. It's an entirely different species with a unique life history that makes them particularly problematic for moose. So unlike most tick species, so every tick species has 3 life stages: larva, nymph, and adult. Most ticks, like a deer tick, feed on a different host during each of those stages, right? They'll get on an animal. If it's a deer tick, as a larva, it's probably getting on like a mouse. Taking a blood meal, it's on there for a day or two, maybe, drops off, molts into the next life stage, finds a new host, takes a blood meal for a couple of days, drops off. And then the adults are the ones we pick up. Nymphs and adults, the ones we pick up most often. Winter ticks, entirely different. They get on an animal as a larva in the fall. They spend the entire winter on one animal, molt through all 3 life stages on that one animal over the course of the winter, and then drop off in the spring as an adult. They're a single host tick, very uncommon among ticks. It's problematic for moose more so than other species for a couple reasons. First is the timing. When winter ticks are questing in the fall, they're seeking a host. That coincides with the moose rut. So moose are more active, they're moving around the landscape more, they pick up more ticks because of that. And winter ticks aren't picked up 1 or 2 at a time like a deer tick. They quest in larval clusters, so they're picked up by the hundreds or thousands at a time. So it isn't that a moose is out there picking up a tick every step to get to the 30,000 ticks they pick up. They might pick up 1 of these clusters a day, maybe. But over the course of the 1 to 2 month questing period in the fall, 1,000 at a time, those add up to tens, 20, 30, 90,000 ticks on some moose. The reason that is a problem for moose and not for other species is that moose are terrible groomers. They did not evolve with external parasites like ticks, so they don't habitually groom themselves. Any other animal, like a deer, for example, regularly grooms itself. Whether it has an itch or not, they just do it, just like your pets probably do. Over the course of the 5 months that these ticks are trying to live on that animal, most of them get knocked off an animal that grooms. So very few actually can complete their life cycle on something like a deer. Because moose basically don't groom until it's way too late in the cycle and the ticks are really bothering them, they end up carrying tens of thousands of ticks all the way through the winter. And when those all take a blood meal at the same time in late winter, smaller moose, particularly, because they'll carry just as many ticks as a larger moose, they cannot replace their blood quick. And it can often kill calves, really debilitates other moose. That's a big problem for moose. And again, it's only really a population level problem in that core moose range where moose densities are high. Most moose in New England, throughout the Northeast, probably have winter ticks on them, some winter ticks on them. A moose in southern Vermont, moose in Massachusetts, probably has hundreds, if not a couple thousand winter ticks on it in any given year. 1,000 winter ticks is not a problem for a moose, right? Moose are gigantic, ticks are small. But 30,000 winter ticks is a problem for a moose. And the only way you get 30,000 is if you have enough moose to support that high tick population. So the only place we have problems with winter ticks at the population level is where we have a lot of moose. Our goal ultimately is to have a healthy moose population, right? We're not, obviously we sort of care about how many moose are out there. We want people to have a chance of seeing one, but ultimately we care about having a healthy, sustainable population that's going to be more resilient to winter ticks, to whatever other parasites or diseases might come their way in the future that we don't even know about yet. We want a healthy population. I have to throw this in there continuously, but we cannot manage winter ticks. There is no direct way to control winter ticks, right? We can't spray something on the landscape. WMUE, which is a tiny part of Vermont, is 650 square miles. You can't treat that. You can't treat most of the moose. You can't capture them and treat them realistically. If someone wanted to give us $1 billion, we probably could do it once. But more importantly, this just completely ignores the actual problem, the cause of the problem, which is overabundant, highly abundant moose, right? We're trying to treat something because we don't like ticks when we should be addressing the cause of the problem. The other thing to keep in mind is winter ticks are native to Vermont. They've been here every bit as long as moose have. The only reason they're abundant now, the main reason, is high density moose population for several decades now that allows them to sustain those high numbers. So how are we doing on the health front, or controlling ticks for that matter? This is our tick counts on harvested bull moose. This is our best index of how many winter ticks are out there on the landscape. And the main thing I would point out here is that it is generally trending downward. That's encouraging. I'd like it to be going down quicker, but it is generally trending downward. So for reference, these counts are, we count 4 10 by 10 centimeter spots on a moose when it comes in. And this is, part the hair 4 times in each of those spots. This is maybe 1/1000th of the number of moose or ticks that are on a given moose. But it is an index. We sample enough animals. It's a reasonable index of how many ticks are out there on the landscape for moose to pick up by the time hunting season comes around. This is not a bad number compared to our neighboring states, but for reference, when we were hunting in other parts of Vermont, and I could show this, I guess, in the early years of this, average counts were less than 10. There were like 5 to 8 a year in the rest of Vermont. So we've got room for improvement here, but we're at least headed in the right direction. Other health measures we keep track of, this is ovulation rate. We get this from the ovaries that we have hunters bring us from cow moose if they're harvested. It's essentially birth rate, how many calves the cow would give birth to the following spring. We have started to see a bit of an uptick the last couple of years. We're right around 1 calf per cow. And these are prime age cows, so 3 years old and older. We were at 0.9 for a long time, so we've ticked up a bit. But ideal is about 1.2. meaning about 20% of your cows have twins. We still never see twins. It's extremely rare. So we've got room for improvement, but again, sort of looks like we're maybe trending in the right direction. Body weight, I'll show this. This previous one is a rolling 3-year average. This one is not, it's just each individual year. Again, seems to be ticking up. What I wanted to point out, though, the reason I showed the individual year is this past year we saw a dip in body weights for a little bit for adults, but particularly for yearling moose. That was a regional trend. Maine saw the same thing. We're not entirely sure what it was, but it wasn't related to winter ticks. There's something funky happened. It was such an easy winter. Our best guess right now, such an easy winter last year that potentially a lot of small calves survived that normally wouldn't have. That's our best guess as to why those body weights came down for yearlings in particular, but even maybe for adults. But something we're keeping an eye on, not something we're overly concerned about, but I wanted to point that out. So population trend, where are we at right now? Just for historical perspective, we used to have a ton of moose, about 3 times what we currently have in E. We have a lot now. We had 3 times that 20 years ago. We intentionally reduced that. We did that. That was us. We stopped trying to reduce it in after 2010, and we have been stable since 2011. It should have grown, but the ticks kept it down low. I'm showing 2 things here. Our population estimates, moose per square mile in green, and motor vehicle collisions in E in blue. The reason I show both is to point out that the waves you see in the last 15 years are just flukes of the whatever index we use. Realistically, population has been generally stable over that time. If I showed you only the green, you'd think there was this sort of a spike around 2020, and that wasn't actually a thing. So just to emphasize, no way we measure populations ever going to be perfect. They're all going to have little things that aren't real. But generally, we think it's been stable over the past close to 15 years now. So looking forward, again, showing you just the population estimate. Remember, it's more stable than that looks. We are still at about 1.26 is our estimate, density estimate for E combined. This past year, our target is 1. So we're still well above our target. We do appear to be trending toward it downward. That's what we're trying to do. So that's I guess a good thing. We may not be declining as fast as that looks, but assuming that we are, we still have at least a couple years before we'd actually hit target, before we actually hit 1 moose per square mile. And that is why we're recommending same permit allocation again. Keep doing what we're doing. Most likely 1 more year, right? I think, so this is that permit allocation. I've adjusted the expected harvest a little bit downward based on the last couple of years, but this is what that permit allocation looks like. Most likely, and I'm not going to guarantee anything because we're going to look at the data we collect this year and make that decision a year from now, but most likely we'll be adjusting permit numbers next year. Even if we're still trying to reduce, we probably won't want to reduce as quickly as we're aiming to here, right? We'll be closer to target. We'll be trying to level out to some extent. But right now, 180 permits, 20 of them allocated to the archery season, 154 to the regular season, and then 3 each to the auction and special opportunity, which they have their choice of seasons and WMU. So again, total 86 is based on average success rates over the past 5 years. That works out to about 86 moose expected, with a considerable range there because our success rates have varied quite a bit in the last few years. I guess the last bit I'd add is it's about, I think it works out to 55% of the permits in E1 45% in E2. This is exactly the same as last year. So I will, I guess, stop there. Timeline, the same as the waterfowl one, except the meetings are different, but preliminary approval, straw vote tonight. We have 3 public hearings combined with our deer hearings that we do every year in March, 17th in Bennington, the 18th in Orleans, and March 20th at U32 in East Montpelier. My presentation, the actual document will be on the website as well. We'll take comments by email, and then April 9th for our final one official vote on these permit numbers. So that, Brad.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Good presentation. Quick question on the winter severity index and how that's tracking and what kind of impact that's going to have on the moose population this year, coupled with these numbers being the same as they were last year.
Yeah, we don't have. I have looked at winter severity data through January, which we didn't have any snow through January in most places, or very little. So obviously we're racking up winter severity points pretty fast right now, most places. I would say for moose, usually winter doesn't have a huge impact on moose, but very deep snow, which is what we have right now, is an energetic drain, especially on calves. So we could see slightly higher calf mortality, but that's assuming this deep snow lasts for several more months, which it may not, right? We have to see how it plays out. But I wouldn't expect any significant impact on moose, at least not yet. Oh.
Okay. Thank you. And does it help relative to the tick that are now attached to the moose?
No, I mean, once it ticks on a moose, it's perfectly warm and happy. There's no winter weather is going to affect it.
Okay.
A long winter, if we have snow well into April and those ticks are dropping off on snow, that can have an effect on ticks next year, but not in the current year.
Yes.
So in places like where there were, in places across North America where there was more than one moose per square mile, and they're farther north, so they have a longer winter season, do they have less problem with winter ticks?
Yeah.
So that if the ticks don't get a chance, they get frozen before they get attached to the tick?
Yeah, it's sort of, it works at both ends, right? Like their period of time to find a moose in the fall is shorter because the snow comes. Once the snow comes, whatever ticks aren't on a moose die. So they have less time to find a moose, so fewer of them get on. And then in the spring, yeah, a lot more of them are dropping onto snow. So far fewer of them can complete their cycle. So yeah, and it's not, I mean, even you get the far northern end of Maine, they still have problems with ticks, but it's less than, our latitude. So just here, we see that pretty quickly.
So with climate change, we're likely to have more problems.
Climate change affects that, whatever density, threshold, whatever density of moose, like if our target is 1 right now, and we think that might alleviate the winter tick problem, it might have to be lower in the future, maybe. At some point, the density is low enough where it doesn't matter what the climate does. But yeah, that probably affects that. David?
I am just curious, in your presentation, you mentioned that some moose do survive brainworm. What does that mean? Do they return and are they return to a healthy condition? Do they breed successfully? Do they have a normal lifespan, or will they spend the rest of their lives looking like the moose in the picture that you showed us?
Well, the honest answer is no one fully understands how it works, but most likely the moose that are surviving brainworm never reached that stage. So moose pick up brainworm by ingesting the larvae, and then that larvae has to go through some complicated internal thing before it reaches the nervous system. And the belief is that if that larvae gets lodged somewhere before it reaches the nervous system, and the moose has an immune response before there's any actual neurological damage, it can potentially survive, and then it is immune to future infection. But yeah, once they reach the nervous system, I think it's fatal at that point, almost universally.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Nick, do you see any difference in the winter tick load depending on the age or sex of the moose examined? Or do you not bother to track?
Age, we don't really see much of a difference. Bulls carry a higher tick load because they're more active during the rut. But other than that, not really much of an age difference. In fact, calves and cows have almost identical tick loads, which of course they're moving together, so that sort of makes sense. But
Can you speak more to what's happening in Unit C? Sorry.
I think C's always had one of our higher moose densities outside of E. Frankly, I think what we see is just a fluke of the survey, the way we're estimating moose numbers. So that the model that we use, it essentially uses deer hunter sighting rates of moose to relate that to a density that was estimated by aerial surveys. But it was developed in Northern New Hampshire, and then we refined it in E and D2. And it was never built on densities, probably densities at below 1 per square mile. And it was built on places where your moose are pretty widely distributed and your deer hunters are pretty widely distributed. When we start looking at other places in Vermont, especially our mountain units, our moose tend to be at higher elevation, and most of our deer hunters tend to hunt the edges of those units at lower elevation where there are more deer. So those two distributions don't match, and essentially we really don't know how that model works or how well it accurately predicts moose numbers in other areas with lower moose density. I think the thing you just saw in C is just a fluke of 1 or 2 hunters got into a group of moose, and so this past year we had a little bump in the number of moose seen. And maybe that's whether that's real or not, but you're just such a small number of moose seen in each of these units that 1 or 2 hunters seeing 5 moose instead of 1 can totally change your density. Yes.
Page 4, you have D2 shaded along with E.
For the objective. Yeah. So the objective in D2 was set at 1 per square mile, just like E. I'm going to blame my predecessors for that. I wasn't the moose biologist when I said that, but no, historically D2 had higher moose densities, but since we redrew the WMU boundaries in 2014, it has never been close to 1 per square mile. We essentially took all the places in D2, the old D2 that had a lot of moose, and put them all in E. In E. So D2 really shouldn't be dark green like that. But
right. You mentioned, I think, in one of your other presentations that there was more logging going on in that area.
There's more in E. I don't know about D2. I don't know that area that well. But yeah, I mean, the problem in any of our other units other than E is a lot of logging is still very small scale compared to, Weyerhaeuser.
How many years now have we been at 180 permits?
This would be the 3rd year at 180. So we were 100 for 2 years, and we've been at 180 for the past 2 years. This would be the 3rd year at 180.
Fred?
Yeah, another quick question. On one of your slides, Nick, I think it might have been the weight of the calves, and it showed a dip, but you also said that that was a regional impact, and because so many calves may have survived that otherwise wouldn't have, they brought down the weight. So, are there any other comparisons that you do, or again, with all of these that you've presented us, the data points, how are we comparing to our neighbors, whether that's New Hampshire and Maine, in terms of the whole process of getting to a healthier moose and getting down to a desired moose per square mile? Are we are we on par with other states, or are other states outperforming us or underperforming us?
I would say we are ahead of the game in terms of managing moose numbers. New Hampshire has an extremely minimal moose hunt at this point. Maine is trying in one management district, they call it, to reduce moose numbers to address winter ticks. They have not been able to kill anywhere near enough moose to do that. So they haven't been successful in that sense. As far as body weights and like reproductive rates go, we're all pretty much in the same boat. Again, nothing concrete. Ours seem to at least have leveled off, if not be starting to tick upward. I don't think other states are seeing that. Or Maine, I'll speak to Maine. New Hampshire doesn't have any data on cows. I think they harvested one cow this past year. But Maine is kind of leveled off at their lowest levels ever, which I don't know. I think they might be a little higher than us. Their moose tend to be slightly larger than ours, they're a little further north type of thing. But I think, again, these are all regional problems. We're all generally seeing the same patterns. I think we're starting to see signs that what we're doing is working, but none of that is conclusive at this point.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'd also like to know, so moose in the winter, their preferred browse is balsam fir. Is that correct?
They like fur. I wouldn't say it's the preferred browse, but they do browse a lot of it.
Okay, so at one moose per square mile, you don't really see significant impacts on forest regeneration.
We don't really in E anymore. We don't hear complaints from the timber companies anymore. Granted, again, they harvest a lot, so they spread the moose out pretty well. I think that density in another part of Vermont where the logging is very limited, you might see it because all your moose are going to be drawn to those newer areas. But we don't really. I mean, there are localized impacts, especially on fur, because just like we would see browse impacts in a deer yard, no matter how few deer you have, you're always going to have impacts in a deer yard. In areas where moose concentrate in the winter, you're always going to have some browse impacts, but it's very localized at this point. It's not widespread like it was.
I think when they're having the browsing impacts, that was at 4 moose per square mile, somewhere around there.
Yeah, when it was significant.
Now you're down around 1.26
Yeah.
or something like that. So it dropped them.
Yeah, we really, if ticks were not a thing at all, we could probably sustain 1.5 to 2 moose per square mile, given the habitat quality in E, without any impacts to forest regeneration. So we'd be fine where we're at from a habitat perspective. Just got to deal with parasites too.
All right, well, thank you, Nick. So once again, we're looking for a straw vote here. So we're looking for a preliminary approval for the 2025 moose season recommendation by the Department of 180 permits. So if you approve, please do so by raising your hand. You heard me?
He's way in the back.
Okay, Linda, I see. Getting her hands up. All right. Unanimous? All right. Good to go, Nick. Perfect. Okay, so what we'll be doing is we're looking for a dinner break here. So it is 6:16, so when folks want to come back. Math, if I could. 20. 20 minutes. All right, so 6:40. That work?
Yes.
All right. We'll be back. 6:40. Both microphones are. Mike's are live. All right, all the board members back. Looks like we got everyone. All right. To resume, agenda item number 6. Proposed moose / deer / moose regulation changes. First vote, I'll hand it over to the commissioner.
Once again, I'll introduce our deer and moose project lead, Nick Gordon.
You just noise up. So there are actually 3 separate rules we're going to go through here tonight. The deer rule, the moose rule. But first, we're actually going to go through carcass import regulation, which we realized you all were not actually sent the text of that rule. It was mentioned in the summary document, this change. But I will walk through that language, I'll pull that up. So I'm going to go through each of these separately. First, I'm going to do this at the front end instead of at the end. This is an actual rule, not a process like the moose and the waterfowl. So we have a first vote tonight. This begins the whole official rulemaking process. It also determines what we present for public comment. Again, we have those 3 deer and moose hearings, March 17th, 18th, and 20th. We'll have 2 additional hearings the week of May 5th to 9th. Those are typically our deer antlerless ones. We'll combine with these regulation changes. We haven't scheduled, well, we have the 6th, I believe May 6th in Winooski. We have scheduled, we haven't scheduled the second one. We don't have I don't even know where we're looking at venue yet. Have a location for that. It'll be in the southeast part of the state, I think is what's left.
Nick, while you're talking about that, you're not doing any virtual for deer moves, huh? Like,
we're not doing any. So that, again, the presentations will be online if people want to watch the presentation. We can't really do the back and forth, have people ask questions in a virtual meeting, at least not in a constructive way. We don't feel so they can watch the full presentations. They'll be able to, of course, watch the recording of this meeting if they wanted. They'll be able to read the actual documents. So they can find the information, but no, we're not going to do a virtual meeting because we don't find it to be very
because I know they did do one for fish, the fish regs. That's why.
Yeah, we tried them during COVID, and we just people are a lot more willing to ask questions online, and it becomes a whole lot, and it's hard to manage and hard to handle it. It ends up not being constructive. So
no hybrid either. Just
no, we're not planning
hybrid. Actually, doesn't have been separate.
Like, again, it's nice for people to be able to watch, like that works well, but if people want to be able to comment from online, we just can't manage all that. Good question.
Yeah, we have all that common option. This is a much longer timeline. So right now we're looking at a second vote, probably in June on these, and then a final vote sometime later in the summer. Ideally before August so that we can get it in the 2026 law book. All of these, except for one of the moose changes, all of these, which I'll talk about, all of these will take effect in 2026. Not this current fall. A year and a half from now, really. So first one is the one, again, apologize, but you guys were not actually sent the language for this. Appendix 17, which has a very long title. This is actually the title of the rule. Rule governing the importation and possession of deer or elk from chronic wasting disease endemic areas and captive hunt or farm facilities. Essentially, what we are doing in this rule is replacing deer or elk with the term cervids. And that just broadens this to include species other than deer or elk, like moose or caribou, that are susceptible to CWD, but just weren't included when this rule was put in place, I think in 2005. At that time, deer and elk were probably the only species that had been found with CWD. So just to walk through the language of that real quick here. So again, basically all we're doing, I have a mouse. All we're doing is replacing deer or elk with cervid, and we define the term cervid. So know what it is for the purposes of this rule. Cervid means any species in the family Cervidae, anything in the deer family. They're all susceptible to CWD. This rule should include all of them. Corrections, replacing deer and elk with cervid. Yeah, deer and elk with cervid. We scratched the term non-resident there from 3.2. That shouldn't have been in there, not relevant. And otherwise, that's what we're doing. It's a pretty simple change. We're essentially just trying to cover species other than deer, which I don't even know how broad deer would be interpreted, and elk. So we're trying to cover other species. That's that. Any questions or discussions on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, David.
Are there captive hunting facilities in the state still?
No, there are not any in Vermont, but so this rule would cover anyone who goes out of state to a captive hunt facility and tries to bring a carcass back.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about here in Vermont.
No, this is about importing carcasses back to Vermont from other areas.
Okay, thank you.
So we need to vote separately on each rule, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'll vote at the end.
And that's all I have on this one. So
you do want to make the vote now, okay?
Yeah. So I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we approve this amendment to Title 10 VSA 17.
Second.
Okay, we have first and second. Any more discussion? Did second. Oh. All right, hearing no discussion. We'll vote by roll call. The yes is approving the proposed changes to 10 VSA Appendix 17. Brian?
Yes.
Nicholas?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
I'm a yes. That passes. Move along.
Okay, next. Appendix 33, which is the moose management rule. So we have essentially two substantive changes here. We made a couple other changes to the rule to update language related to the veteran allocation and the auction permit allocation so that the rule is consistent with statute. So I'll go over those in the language, but essentially the statute changed from 2019 and we haven't updated the rule since then. So they say different things about how many permits should be issued to veterans and auctions. We're just trying to make the rule match the statute. We have been following statute for the past 5 years, so nothing is going to change in how we operate. We're just updating the rule language to match statute. And again, I'll go through that when I go through the language on this one. Of our two substantive changes, the first one is we're recommending that we establish a special opportunity season. So what we call special opportunity permits are permits authorized by statute, technically issued by the commissioner. They are issued to people with life-threatening illness and sponsored by a charitable organization, typically Hunt of a Lifetime, more often than not. Occasionally, a couple other organizations have done it in the past. So this is in response to a petition submitted a year ago by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Conservation Group, asking that these hunters be allowed to hunt during the peak of the moose rut, which is essentially our archery season, but using a firearm. Because of the legal complications of trying to let someone use a firearm within what is otherwise an archery season, it's just much simpler to create a special season that is concurrent with our archery season. So it's a roundabout way of letting these people hunt with a gun during our archery season. So our archery season is the first 7 days of October, always October 1st to 7th, regardless of what days of the week those fall on. Again, this season would be the same dates. And that's really, that's essentially the thing here. We support the intent of the petition in this case, which is essentially providing a better hunting experience for these hunters. I will say that they can already choose which season to hunt in. They could hunt the regular season. They could choose to hunt during the archery season if they wanted. They would, under current rule, have to use archery equipment during the archery season. Because many of them have mobility challenges and often fairly significant mobility challenges, using archery equipment is not a realistic option for most of them. They already struggle to get within range of a moose with a gun during the regular season. At least during the rut, during our archery season, they would be better able to call a moose into range. So provides a better hunting experience. It would avoid some crowding issues by moving them up earlier. There's a fair number of benefits we see to it, and because it's only pretty much 3 people every year, it could be fewer, but it's usually always 3. Their success rate's already the same as other either sex permits. It runs about 60, about 2 out of the 3 are successful on average. I don't expect that to change. So really doesn't affect the harvest in any meaningful way. So we think, probably it's an easy change to make, relatively speaking. Provides a good benefit.
Nick, Nick, I just have a quick question, just to make sure I understand what we're doing. All we are technically doing with that language is establishing the season itself, separate and apart from the regular moose rifle season. And moving forward, will we on an annual basis establish the dates for that season?
No, so the dates would be established in rule. So yeah, essentially we are establishing that season. It would be the same dates every year. and we're giving these special opportunity permit holders the option of hunting in this season. It would only be for them. It's,
Correct.
you
No,
know,
I understand that. I said I didn't know if the dates were fixed or if we had the flexibility as a board to set the dates. But they're going to
No,
be
the
fixed
date-
in the rule.
the dates would be fixed in the rule.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
So that's that change. This, I will say, this is the one exception to the 2026 timeline. We are recommending that this change, a little more complicated than that, but essentially the moose rule will go into effect on passage, except for the next change I'm going to talk about. But functionally, this change would take effect this year if passed. Everything else would take effect in 2026. The next change is we recommend extending the regular moose season to 9 days.
Do we need to vote on this first before we get?
No, we do the whole rule at once. So the regular moose season starts, this is my imaginary October calendar. Regular moose season starts the third Saturday in October, always, and it runs for 6 days. So it ends on a Thursday, which I don't really think makes a lot of sense. Why end on a Thursday? So our recommendation is give hunters another 3 days, go through the following weekend. Just a more logical season length. Probably the reason this season is 6 days, so it was extended to 6 days, I think in 2002 or 3. So it's been there for a little over 20 years. Before that, it was 4 days. Probably at the time, it felt like 9 days was a bit too much of an extension, maybe. I honestly don't know why it was 6 days, but Thursday is an odd time to end the season, we feel. So recommending extending this. I don't expect a big change in like success rates because of this. New Hampshire has this exact season structure, starts the same time as ours. Theirs does go for 9 days. They have almost the exact same success rates that we historically have had, except for the past 2 years. Speaking of the past 2 years, I mentioned how bad the success rates were this past year. They were pretty low the year before as well. Main reason for that was weather. A longer season helps moderate the impact of inclement weather, right? It's very unlikely you're going to have 70-degree temperatures for 9 straight days. Thought it was unlikely for 5 straight days, but that happens too. But you know, if we had had this past year, we'd had 4 days after that hot stretch. It would have at least brought our success rate up closer to normal. So more consistent success rates, more predictable harvest. That's all desirable. Little extra hunting time for those hunters who can't get time off. They'd still be able to hunt both weekends. So maybe makes moose season a little more accessible. Lastly, I'll say the reason this is coming up now and hasn't been brought up before, currently this second weekend is youth weekend, youth deer weekend, most years. So right now I would not want this because we'd have overlapping issues for our staff. It would be a nightmare. So we've all seen that we're going to recommend moving youth weekend back. We'll get to that. But with youth weekend moved out of there, then this opens up. We can extend moose season. So that is our other change on moose. So I can pull up the language now. We can walk through the actual changes here. So there's a little summary page there. So this is this highlighted yellow part. This is making the rule consistent with statute. So the current statute allows us to auction up to 6 permits each year. We're not doing 6, we only do 3 a year. But the existing rule actually says we have to do 5 every year. Yeah, we've been doing 3. So this is just a change to make the rule consistent with statute. Go ahead, Brad. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. Just a question relative to the permits. At one point in time, and I don't know what the highest number of permits were that we issued, if it was in 1,200, 1,300, I don't know what it was. But 5 or 6 out of the 1,000 plus whatever permits we used to issue was one thing, but 6 permits out of a decreasing number of permits, that total numbers that we issue, seems to be getting, a much higher, becoming a much higher percentage that we're auctioning off. And I don't know at what point, I don't know what that threshold should be.
So Brad, the current statute, actually, this is why it was changed, but it actually sets a limit at no more than 10%.
Right. But even if we dropped that permits down to 100, 10% means 10 permits that we could auction off. If I'm understanding that. Or is it 6
no
or
more
10%?
than 6? It's no more than
Gotcha.
6
Okay.
and no more than 10%. So obviously 10% would be, if we're issuing fewer than 60 permits, it would be the 10% rule, but we can always issue less. We don't have to issue 5 or 6. We can always issue less. The previous rule required us to issue 5, and that's why we ran into issues back in 2018 when we issued very few permits.
What was the issue?
Well, I think in 2018, we had recommended, I think the initial recommendation was for 15 permits to be issued, which is obviously a very low number. 5 had to go to the auction, 5 had to go to veterans, and that left, and 3 went to special opportunity. So that left 2 permits for the regular public, which those got eliminated. We only issued 13 that year, and they were all the special allocations. That's why in 2019, the statute was changed.
Okay. Thank you.
This is just a technical change of the definition of wildlife management unit. Obviously, this hadn't been updated in a while because we haven't had 25 wildlife management units since 2013. So that was just an update. And then this is the part about adding, so it's 3 moose seasons now instead of 2. The strikeouts are, we put the method of take is defined later under each season, so it didn't need to be here. This is the regular season, and this is the language. Gets a little complicated because we have to pass the whole rule at one time. So in order to allow the special opportunity change to go into effect this year, but delay the regular season extension until 2026, we have to have this sort of weird language that season is open for 6 days, but beginning October 1st, 2026, or you can change that date, but before the moose season in 2026, it'll be open. After that, it'll be open for 9 days. It's a little weird in that language will be in there until we update the rule again, but it doesn't really matter. It's just, this is allowing us to have different effective dates for these 2 parts. And then we added this language about you have to have a valid permit, take an animal. Then the special opportunity season, that basically copies the language from the regular season. We struck this because everyone is now on the 5-year waiting period. We used to have a 3-year waiting period. So we didn't need this. Again, this was sort of the same deal as up above, where it was a certain effective date where the 5-year waiting period kicked in, and we're way beyond it. Just some simple wording changes there. That is redundant. That strikeout in 9.3, so it wasn't needed. It's covered above in 9.2. Everyone needs to have a hunting license. We did change this, so how late someone can defer a permit. So we're giving them up to the first day of the season for a medical deferment. They have to actually submit documents from their doctor to get approved for medical deferment. It's not like someone can just be like, well, I don't feel like hunting this year, so I'm going to get a deferment. And often, of course, medical issues tend to crop up last minute. The reality is the 3-day period didn't work for us either. We had multiple deferments this past season. Some of you may have noticed, if you really paid attention to the harvest report, we actually only issued 178 permits last year, because we had 3 deferments within a week of the season before the 3-day period, and we could not fill 2 of the permits. We redrew people and asked them, like, hey, you want a permit? You have a week. And they were antlerless permits. People didn't want them. Understandably, I wouldn't either on that short notice.
You got my number.
If we kept drawing, we might have got to you eventually. But so this really doesn't affect whether we can reissue permits or not. We were already running into issues with that. It just gives people that have a legitimate medical issue right before the season a couple extra days. This change. And you'll see this came out of the deer rule in multiple places too. So this is about a cocked crossbow in a motor vehicle. That is going to be covered in statute now.
There is this is proposed to be a statutory update. Just as a note, the timeline for adoption of this rule will get us past the end of the legislative session. If that update does not happen in statute, we'll want to keep this language in the rule.
Right. So at the second vote, we would have to basically keep this part, adjust that. But yeah, this will be covered, and you'll see this struck out of the deer rule in multiple places as well, because it will be covered in statute, ideally, if that bill passes. So means of take, that's just clarifying what that section referred to. Again, means of take for archery season, just a clarification there. Just cleaning up the language of that. Doesn't matter if you're taking the moose, if you're hunting moose. So I'm adding there. We cleaned up the language a little bit about what you can, quartering, essentially what you can leave in the field. We added maybe. Anyway, we're just trying to clean this up and make it more consistent with the other rules, so that what you can, essentially, you don't need to carry out any dogs.
Nick,
Yeah,
quick question. If you scroll back up where you said that during archery season, nobody shall carry a muzzleloader or a firearm or something. Yeah. Do we now have to change that to reference the other language we're changing to allow firearms during archery season for the hunt of a lifetime?
No, that's why we created the separate season. That's why that special opportunity season is not an archery season. It's a firearm season.
Okay, so this is just during archery references. Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Right, and it is confusing because they're overlapping seasons. I get that, but it is a separate firearm season that occurs at the same time as an archery season.
Yep, got it. Thanks.
That's kind of the way youth and novice is, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, deer archery is ongoing at the same time as. Deer archery is ongoing at the same time as every season except currently rifle season. So yes. Yeah, so we're trying to clarify the language there, essentially that you don't have to bring out any bones. You can completely debone a moose in the field. And then the part about both central incisors is covered below in 14.5.
Your document was different. Go back up to 14.4.
Does yours say something different?
Yeah, it's big and red.
Yeah.
So maybe there's does have to.
This is the version.
This is the version you sent me with the extra language, but what does yours say?
Well, they struck out.
I'll grab that copy.
They struck out what you have written there and added a bunch.
Yes. So what is on yours is what we want. So it is longer, but in the red text, a moose carcass may be quartered or deboned in the field prior to reporting, provided all requirements of Appendix 2 and sections 4921 through 4925 are met. So essentially, Appendix 2 is tagging, reporting. It's a reporting rule, so you have to report. And then 4921 through 4925 is the wanton waste rule. So just saying that you can debone your moose in the field, you have to bring everything out, which is covered in the wanton waste rule. And you have to meet all the reporting requirements, which is section 2. So this is the language roughly that is in the law digest.
We changed that this past year, the law digest for the petition. Clear that you could pack out deer and bear, so we're trying to match the language.
Right, we're trying to be consistent across rules with this, what you can.
There's also a discrepancy between what's on the screen and the one in your hand. If you go back to 4.0 moose seasons, when you were talking about 4.2a, I think the language is different.
Yes, it is. The version I have has this weird bit about, again, allowing us to delay the 9-day extension to 2026.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Whatever draft you're working on.
Thank you. Yes. Whatever that is, 4.2a, is different in the version I have. For this is the language we're recommending because this allows the separate implementation of the special opportunity season versus the extension of the regular season. What you have on 14.4, your version is what we want in 14.4. Not really sure what came out of that. Because we're trying to be, like I said, we're trying to be consistent across rules and have this same language in all of our rules about quartering. What you have to bring out, what you can leave in the field. So we were at 14.4. Yeah. Okay. The language you have is correct. We removed all edible portions because 14.5 is about what you have to bring to the biological check station. You don't need to bring your edible meat to the check station. You need to bring everything else that we need to actually report your moose. But if you want to meat in a cooler or whatever, it's not a biological reporting requirement. It's a reporting requirement. Not in 14.5.
So you just don't get the weight on that.
If you quarter a moose, we don't weigh it. No.
They used to.
We
I did
can. They used to have a basket we could weigh them in, but frankly, don't need to weigh on every moose. You know, I wish more people would quarter a lot of animals. Permit allocation 51. That's again just cleaning up some language. So hopefully is a little more coherent. And then 16.2, so 16 is a part about the veteran permits, and the language here in 16.2 comes directly from statute. So this is be consistent with what is in statute, because these permits are actually, there's a statute that authorizes these. We have to be consistent with statute, so that language comes directly from statute. 17, same thing.
Excuse me, what, 1 minute? If I might.
David, yeah.
Is there some reason that that is put in the negative? That they have not received a dishonorable discharge? Could that say that they have received an honorable discharge? Or is there some other kind of discharge short of a dishonorable discharge? I don't know the military well enough. But why is that a negative language as opposed to positive?
There are things between those two.
I think there's
less
something.
than honor.
I think there's something called less than an honorable.
So they would still
That seems to be the, yeah. That's the consensus, David. There's something in, there are things in between there, so.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the language in statute. So we want to be consistent. 17, again, auction. This is, again, there's statute here, so we are taking the language from statute, the new language. Previously, it said 5 in both cases. Now it says 10% not to exceed, not more than 10% and never to exceed 6. Right. So in theory, I think we're at a point where we could, although I'd still argue against it because we have a limited number of either sex permits, but we could issue one more veteran permit because 6 would be less than 10% of what we're issuing now, but it's more than 10% of our regular season either sex permits. That's what they all get. So there are only 54 of those. Again, just striking 5 because it's not relevant anymore. And then we added section 18, just defining what a special opportunity moose permit is, because that was not defined in rule previously. And we call them that, but they're not called that in statute. 4255J does not call them special opportunity permits. That's just what we call them. So we wanted to define that here and define that they can hunt during the regular season or during that new special opportunities. I see David has another question. David?
Yeah, when that language as written allows the commissioner to issue 3 permits to a person. And I don't think that's what's intended. I think the commissioner may issue a license up to 3 persons who have, and then go on with the rest of the sentence, life-threatening disease.
That is a valid point. I mean, again, I copied this language directly from statute, but
well,
so I don't know.
This is the wrong board to quote legislature to, in my opinion. I just think that language needs to be addressed so that it makes sense. Thank you.
Persons who have.
Yeah, that would work.
2 persons who have.
Yeah.
Or any person, yeah.
Yeah.
I think 2 persons. Because
2 persons who have a
the same, yeah.
Yeah.
Persons who have a life-threatening disease.
Yeah, sounds like we can probably make that change, David, to persons who have. Brad?
Yeah, I'm hung up on the issue that you had in 2018 with the auction permits and these. And is there an order of precedence in these kind of 3 categories: the military, the special opportunity, and then the general public for permits? Or is it at the discretion of the board or the commissioner?
I don't think that has ever come up. We've never issued so few permits that we had to choose between which ones of these we would issue.
Well, it sounds like 2018, it sounds like there was that.
Well,
to a certain
we
degree.
issued enough to cover all of these. There were none left for regular people.
Correct.
But
I guess my question was that a choice of the commissioner, the board, or an interpretation of statute to go that route?
at that time, I think it was a board decided on the ultimate permit number. So at the time, that was a board decision to go with that number of permits.
Okay. And allocated in that kind of priority.
Well, yeah, I mean, they got priority because at the time, if we had any permits, those ones had to be issued. At least now we would have the authority to, I think we'd still have to issue them. No, we don't have to because it now says may issue.
It gives the board more flexibility.
Right. The board has a lot more flexibility now.
Okay. Okay. I was just struck by the fact that we issued permits to the auction. We auctioned permits before we gave them to Vermonters. That's the piece that kind of was a surprise to me when I heard that.
And that is exactly why the statute got changed the following year.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'll get over it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So to clarify regarding 18.2, special opportunity permit holder can hunt in either season for a total of 15 days.
Either or, not
Either or, not both.
Right. Or the keyword there.
Okay.
So essentially, we're still giving them the choice that they have now. Because they could, if they wanted to, they could use a bow during regular season. They could use a bow during their new special opportunity season. But we're essentially maintaining the choice they currently have.
Does anything need to be added to that sentence? To prevent from hunting from in both. I think
Or is
or is good.
Or is good. I mean,
Okay.
the interpretation would be one or the other.
Okay.
If the board wants to belt and suspenders it, that's your prerogative,
No,
but
I trust you. I like the word or.
could have, not both. But.
Yeah.
I know or is good.
I like simple language and the lawyer says it's good. Yeah. But it's ultimately your rule, so you are the ones voting on it. That is it for the deer rule, so, or moose rule, whatever one. That's it for the moose rule.
Any, Brad, do you have another question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah, one thing popped in my head when you were mentioning late minute medical deferments. You said you had to redraw the lottery. I know New Hampshire, I don't know if they still do. They used to draw alternates. Because I was drawing one year as an alternate. So you kind of had a heads up that you might get one. I just thought that might not be a bad idea.
I think we could do that. We couldn't draw alternates. Yeah, I mean, it would avoid the issue of someone learning 3 days before the season that, hey, we just drew you for a permit. Okay, I don't want it. We could, we can definitely look into that.
But the main thing, can you put back your October calendar?
Yes.
It's not. When you first mentioned, I heard about you were going to extend the moose season. I thought that's a good idea, but I thought maybe in the other direction earlier, so you get more rut activity possibly, but then that wouldn't capture 2 weekends.
Right.
So my thought process was we'll move it up to start the second Saturday in October. Then you could be earlier plus have 9-day, 2 weekend season.
Right. So, I mean, we have thought of this. Lots of people recommend it being earlier because, you're closer to the rut. It's easier to call bulls. We probably, I don't think we'd be okay moving up a week. So at least for our cow harvest, we need to be this late to get the data from the ovaries. We need to be after they've conceived. Oh, to get that data. So you need to be after the rut.
Yeah.
For our cow harvest. I mean, the bull harvest, yeah, going to be better, but again, we have pretty good success rates most years. Last couple have been an exception, but we have pretty good success rates with this timing. Again, part of the issues we've had lately, we had warm weather last year. Yeah, by some weird chance, it snowed the week before, but odds are you're more likely to get warm weather earlier, right?
Right, that's a trade-off too, but I just, this was a thought.
Yeah, and if honestly, if we didn't need the cow data, the ovary data, there wouldn't be a reason not to move it up. I don't think not that I can think of, but we really need that data.
How close to conception is that data reside in the ovary?
I mean, very soon after conception, but the problem is like the rut isn't all during the first week of October. Like some moose are breeding a little later.
Well,
so for us, it's about being consistent.
Yeah.
Like a lot of them would have bred by the second week, probably most of them, but some wouldn't. And so we'd have a lower ovulation rate, and it wouldn't because it was lower, just because we're measuring her. So that's a reason to keep this.
Any more questions? Okay, so we're looking for a motion regarding 10 VSA Appendix 33. Regarding the goose. Yeah.
So moved.
All right. First, Jay, second. Any discussion? Want to understand the motion? All right, we will vote by.
The motion is to accept the material presented as amended. Because we've made at least one change that I'm aware of.
Yes, so the language would be what you have in your hands with the addition of the amendment to 4.2A that pushes back the extended season until 2026.
Yes.
What you have is correct with that one addition.
Say that.
And the change of section 18 language.
Oh, did you?
And that section 18.
Yes.
Change that to persons who may.
Cadness. All right,
And
can we
that
get
was- that was my motion.
amendment to your motion?
Incorporated
Yes.
those two changes.
Okay. You're good with that amendment to your motion?
And second that amendment.
Okay. So the motion on the table is to accept 10 VSA Appendix 33 with the proposed amendments in our hand regarding sections 4.2 and 18. Okay. All right. We'll vote by roll call. Yes is to approve. Brian Bailey.
Yes.
Nicholas.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Beth.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
Allison.
Yes.
Neil.
Yes.
Linda.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Robert.
Yes.
Jay. Yes. Martin.
Yes.
Richard. Yes. I'm a yes. So that passes as well. All right, moving on. Now, one quick question. Is the turkey seasons broken out?
No, you did turkey season.
So you're all set with that? Yeah, we did, okay.
Yeah, a little weird because we did that separate. Okay. You have them all in one document.
Yeah, all right. Oh, yeah, you can have it right there.
So this should be the last thing we have to go over. So deer rule. This seems like a lot of changes. So I'm going to step through these. They're not exactly in the order that they were presented to you in that summary document. because I want to kind of go through them in reference to the changes we made in 2020. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, we are recommending the establishment of several as 8 expanded archery zones. The expanded archery, the rule creating this sort of season extension was passed in 2020. We just didn't establish any zones at the time. We had grand plans of, you know, some sort of grassroots local outreach thing and being able to make more of it than it was. We don't have the capacity to actually do that, but it is important that we get these zones in place. So again, the language that was passed in 2020 said that within expanded archery zones, the archery season will begin September 15th, and it will be antlerless deer only through September 30th, essentially until the regular archery season starts on October 1st. So essentially, these would be the only areas open to archery hunting, any deer hunting, for these 16 days in late September. Generally speaking, these are developed areas around major cities and towns. Many of them have firearm discharge ordinances. Our ability to harvest deer in these areas is very limited. So we are trying to focus some of our antlerless harvest on these areas and alleviate or ideally avoid deer-human conflicts. Some of these areas already have a lot of deer-human conflicts. Some of them don't yet, but they inevitably will if we don't try to address it. Again, because we really can't harvest deer. So I'm going to run through them really quick because we start talking about boundaries, this will take forever. But what we are proposing, so again, this is sort of an extension or a follow through on the rule we changed 6 years ago. First one is Wildlife Management Unit A, all of Wildlife Management Unit A. This is not a highly developed area. It is just an area we need to kill as many antlerless deer as we can possibly kill. And so we're throwing everything at it. Given that the northwest part of the state has a lot of hunters, in particular a lot of archery hunters, it might work in this area. We might be able to encourage, and this is some people to go here if they can get permission to hunt anywhere. Here we're kind of seeing if this will work as a way to increase antlerless harvest. Not really how this is intended. It's not how most of the rest of the zones work, but here we're going to try it, see how it, if it can help us increase antlerless harvest. Next is the Greater Burlington area. This is a fairly large one, but of course our largest developed area in the state. Includes parts of Colchester, Essex, Williston, Shelburne, Burlington, South Burlington, and Winooski. Burlington, South Burlington, and Winooski, we know have local discharge ordinances that prohibit discharging archery equipment. So not gonna be able to hunt there, regardless of whether we put this in place. And I guess that's a good segue into none of this changes. If you can't hunt in these places currently, you're not going to be able to hunt now. Regardless of whether we call it an expanded archery zone or not, it does not change whether or not you can hunt in a place. We're just extending the season. All we're doing, we're not making it suddenly legal to hunt here when it wasn't before.
I think that could be confusing. If you know a town has an ordinance, like South Burlington, you can't choose anything that launches a projectile. It shouldn't be on the map.
It's on every other hunting map. Nothing that says a local person has to know that there's an ordinance. And that's up to them to understand that. I understand. And I will say that when we publish these maps, these are just to show where the zones are. When we actually publish maps, it will be clearly noted that these towns have, ordinances. But it is also a hunter's responsibility to know that.
Oh,
it is not our department's responsibility, and the warden's talk here, but to enforce local discharge ordinances. Right? It's not a hunting regulation.
I could just see somebody, going in and saying, hey, they got a special zone for South Burlington and fishing said it's good, so we're good. Then there being a problem.
Well, for clarity, Jay, the municipalities can regulate whether you can discharge whatever you want in their municipality. They cannot tell you you cannot hunt here. The only entity that can do that is the state of Vermont. Right. So,
which makes it more confusing. So you can go hunting, you just can't actually shoot it. Right. But there's a few of these, but that's part of why we're trying to expand around this. So we sort of do the moat effect. Yeah, we can't hunt there, but we'll try to hunt everywhere around it. Other one is Newport City. So Newport City has a firearm discharge ordinance. You can shoot a bow there, a lot of deer there. This one, we actually use the municipal boundary. So it is the city boundary. That is the boundary. Most archery hunters can figure out what piece of property they're on and what municipality it's in. The challenge we run into in a lot of these towns, cities, is that all the roads lead to them and none of them form nice borders around them. So we can't really use a road in a lot of them as a nice boundary around them. So in this case, we went to the municipal boundary. I think it works fine for archery hunters. I wouldn't want to use it for firearm hunters, but I think it works fine for archery hunters. St. Johnsbury is another one. We get a fair number of complaints, particularly in years when we have hard winters. So probably this spring, I'll hear about everyone's, cedar hedges are all browsed in St. Johnsbury because the deer down more. But that's another one we can target a little. Montpelier, we get a lot of complaints from Montpelier about deer conflicts and deer damage. This is another one. We use the municipal boundary in this case because, again, there's no nice roads that circle Montpelier to make a nice clean boundary. But I think that works pretty well. Rutland area includes, again, Rutland City is another one that has a discharge ordinance. You cannot fire archery equipment in Rutland City. So we're trying to kind of circle that as best we can. There are a lot of deer in Rutland City and around it. I call this the Bennington area. What this really is the southern portion of WMUN. We are trying to address Bennington a little bit, but we're also trying to focus some of our antlerless harvest in N on this portion of N, which has a lot of deer, so that we can probably back off a little bit in the rest of N, where deer numbers are considerably lower, and in the unit as a whole has been declining. So we want to kind of keep a focus here, but back off the rest of N. So this is sort of an in-between, the WMUA approach of seeing if we can increase antlerless harvest. We're trying to maintain some harvest in this part of N while backing off on the rest of it. And then the last one is Brattleboro. Includes a little bit of Guilford and Vernon because I could get a decent road boundary in this case. Brattleboro has a firearm discharge ordinance in that portion of the town. It actually extends oddly outside of this that I couldn't encircle, but attempting to cover the portion of Brattleboro that has a firearm discharge ordinance. That's the last one of those. So that's kind of building off a 2020 change. These next two are undoing changes we made in 2020. We're recommending to move the youth weekend back to the weekend before the regular season. So we covered this last month, so I'll go through it quick, but when we made that change, youth harvest dropped considerably. This one I actually added, so this is school enrollment in 6th to 10th grade, roughly the ages of kids that hunt youth weekend, roughly. What I wanted to show is that was declining. That explains some of our decline in the early 2000s, 2010s. Youth numbers plateaued around 2016, and they've been fairly stable since then. Our harvest declined. Our harvest also did until 2019, some jumbling, and then it dropped like a rock when we made the change. We went through this, but main reason for that drop, success rates have been considerably lower since the change, averaging about 21% compared to 25% before. That amounts to about 180, given our current youth weekend hunter numbers, about 180 fewer successful youth hunters. That would be most of that difference in the harvest. Part of this is we moved out of that pre-rut period, which is, perfect time to hunt deer. It's the first week in November. But the bigger issue is conflicts with other activities in October. Anecdotally, we don't have hard data, but repeatedly we hear folks who either don't hunt, but more often than not can only go hunt like one evening because they got a soccer game the next day or their brother has a soccer game the next day. And so what we think is happening is these kids are still trying to hunt, but they're getting very little out of the season now. So they're hunting a lot less, lower success rates. So again, it's a very important season for us in terms of biological data collection. More importantly, we just want these youth to have as much opportunity to actually go hunting as possible. I think moving it back to that weekend before regular season will hopefully kind of restore the harvest to what it was. And more importantly, provide kids more time to actually go hunting and they don't have other activities going on in early. Next recommended change, again, I'm doing something we did in 2020. We're recommending to reinstate the antler restriction in WMD1. So again, we covered this last month, but we have goals in our 10-year big game plan. A strategy for achieving our buck age structure goals is to monitor the percentage of yearling bucks in the harvest. If we're above 50%, that tells us our harvest rate, the proportion of bucks that are killed by hunters each year, is too high to allow enough bucks to survive to older age classes to meet our age structure objectives that we have in the big game plan. D1 has been consistently above 50% since 2021. I don't have 2024 age data yet, but I will all but guarantee it will be above 50% again, and likely the only one above 50% again this past fall. So they like to kill whatever's legal up there, and it is having an impact. This is the change in the number of mature bucks harvested before and after 2020, those rule changes. So D1 major drop in the number of mature bucks in the harvest there. This is the number, not percentage of buck. No, it's not the percentage of all harvested bucks that are 3 years old. It's the absolute number taken has dropped by 34% post 2020. So it is having an effect on the number of mature bucks in the population up there. So because we have goals, established goals in our big game plan, if we're going to honestly say we take those seriously, we're going to try to achieve these goals, we need to change the regulation in D1. I had hoped previously that, D1 was maybe going to come back to real close to 50% and we could do some sort of outreach and education and maybe get people to just voluntarily adjust. I think it's beyond that. I think the only way we're going to get the reduction we likely need is to reinstate the AMP restriction. So
I hope that too.
So our map, yeah, Brad.
Can I ask a question? So in those areas that we do have an antler point restriction and we haven't hit the 50% threshold, do we know that we're reaching our age buck structure goals or not?
Where we have an antler point restriction, yeah, this yearling percentage, if we have an antler restriction in a unit, this is not really a meaningful number because most yearlings are off limits. But the reality is in all of those units, because most yearling bucks are off limits, we are meeting our age structure objectives in all of those. It's almost impossible not to, the way we set our objectives. So we are fine in every unit. We have an antler restriction. The only concern is those that we don't, and in this case, they're all fine except D1. David?
Yeah, do these changes in any way address overbrowse, which is a fairly, it's an issue of concern, particularly with foresters and landowners down in the Connecticut River Valley. There have been calls by some in this area for a rifle season, buck doe opening weekend to sort of match what New Hampshire does across the river, where the claim is they do not have an overbrowse problem. And Nick, I believe you have a message sitting on your desk from one of those voices that I hear. all the time. Does this address overbrowse in those areas where it is a documented problem?
David, I would say this particular change does not. This is about buck management, and that is not how we control deer numbers, right? We do that through antlerless harvest. Some of the other changes we're going to discuss, absolutely. We're trying to address those issues of deer overabundance. But this is about buck management, this particular change, and that's not really, we don't address deer numbers overall through the buck management. This is more of a social.
Okay, and as you go through this, when you get to those points that do address overbrowse, please point them out. Thank you.
Yep. So our antler restriction map will go from this currently to this. D1 is the only one that changes. Does sort of create an island of D2 and E up in the kingdom, but I don't think there's a lot more border between antler restriction and no antler restriction too, fun for the wardens, but I don't think that's a real serious issue. So that's that one. Next one is, apologize for the blasphemy, but we recommend allowing antlerless permits to be used during the regular season. We recommend that people be allowed to kill antlerless deer with a rifle. I know, God forbid, but we need to go there.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So back in the late 70s and early 80s, they did the same thing. And I was in the woods at that time, and I was scared because the guns were going off everywhere, at least the first weekend. And the department stopped it. And we went about it in the way we're doing it now. The extended seasons, I think there's a safety issue with that. And I think personally it's aggressive. Well, overly aggressive.
We'll cover our reasoning, but I do want to first say I strongly disagree with it being a safety concern because every other state allows this. And unless you think Vermont hunters are somehow far less safe than other hunters, which I strongly disagree with, there is not a safety concern. I understand things were probably different 40 years ago, but deer hunting has changed a lot, deer management has changed a lot, and our deer population has changed a lot in the last 40 plus years. So we are at a point where we really don't have other options. And again, we are the single state that doesn't allow this. Come on. So before we get into, I think in explaining why we need this, I think it's important to go over how our antlerless harvest system works, right? So every year we come up with a target antlerless harvest. And I would say, imagine this for a specific WMU, not statewide. Think of this as pick your own WMU, but you do it at the WMU level, right? Every year we come up with a target antlerless harvest based on how big our population is and where it is relative to where we want it to be. What is our target, right? Do we need to decrease our population? Do we need to let it increase? Do we want to stabilize it where it's at? That factors in and we come up with a number. We need to kill X number of antlerless deer. That varies year to year based on where the population is, winter severity, a few other factors. To get to that target, we have a few different ways we get there. The first part is what I'll call our sort of base antlerless harvest that we don't have a lot of control over, is our archery and youth, right? Anyone who hunts archery season or the youth or novice season, they can shoot antlerless deer. We don't set any limits on that. If you hunt those seasons, you can shoot antlerless deer. The board does have the authority to turn this on or off in a WMU. You do have the authority as part of our recommendation every year for archery and for youth. You could say in WMU X, no archery antlerless harvest this year. You have that authority. But that's just an off switch. There's no you can half shoot antlerless, half of you can shoot antlerless deer, right? It's either you allow it and everyone can shoot them, or you don't allow it and no one can. So this sort of an on-off. It's pretty consistent, pretty predictable. It's not that consistent every year. It does vary with deer numbers, but for the purposes, simplicity here. And then I showed this jump. So this is essentially what we amounted to in 2020. By increasing our archery antlerless harvest, we sort of increased this base portion of our antlerless harvest, right? We kill a lot more deer, antlerless deer during archery now. Less of a gap to close with antlerless permits, but that was the hope anyway. And then we try to fill the rest with antlerless permits, and we totally control how many antlerless permits we give out, so we can adjust this. But there's a cap to how many antlerless permits we give out. No matter how many we want to give out, we just can't distribute all of them, right? Most of you have been around a few years. You've seen this every year. There's a limit there. So in some years, and depending on what WMU you're talking about, it could be almost every year. It could be once every 15 years or never. But every now and then, we simply cannot issue enough antlerless permits to meet our antlerless harvest objective. A big reason for that, our fill rates on our antlerless permits are they've averaged around 14%. This past year, they were just under 15%. I'll use 15 as an example, 15%. Math's easier. If we want to kill about 150 antlerless deer in a WMU, which is actually a pretty typical number with antlerless permits, if we're trying to kill 150 antlerless deer at a 15% success rate, we need to issue 1,000 antlerless permits. In a lot of WMUs, we don't have 1,000 muzzleloader hunters to take our antlerless permits. So we cannot possibly achieve our antlerless harvest objective under our current rules if we're limiting our permits only to muzzleloader hunters. We need a new pool of hunters. So this is our pool of hunters. The blues and greens are muzzleloader hunters. They amount to 44% of our active deer hunters in 2023. This comes from our hunter survey we did this past spring. 44% of our hunters hunt during a muzzleloader season. 43% of our hunters applied for an antlerless permit last year. So basically everyone who muzzleloads applied for an antlerless permit. Now, some people actually don't get antlerless permits because they only apply in a zone with like 300 permits. That's the only one they wanted a permit in, and so they don't get one. But we've hit our limit. What we can possibly do with muzzleloader hunters, just cannot do more. We need to expand into a different pool of hunters. The big one, obvious, is the 37% of our hunters who only hunt during the regular season. Expanding seasons, adding days to the October muzzleloader or the December muzzleloader is not going to increase fill rate. It's going to spread the harvest out, but our fill rate's not going to change. It didn't change when we added the October muzzleloader season. Fill rate stayed right at 14%. We just spread the harvest out. So we really can't do more with muzzleloader hunters. And this is why we think the regular season is the place to go. It's 37% of our hunters. And then there's also another 15% who hunt archery season where they could kill antlerless deer and the regular season, but do not muzzleload. So they can't kill an antlerless deer with a gun. And I will reiterate, Vermont is the only state that requires hunters to hunt in an add-on, a secondary season to kill antlerless deer. Every other state, you buy your hunting license, you get a doe tag, or maybe it just comes with your license, and then you can go shoot an antlerless deer, usually in a regular season. These are always in regular season. So by adding that extra, more than doubling our pool of potential permit holders, we can distribute all the permits we need to distribute. The other, of course, reality is if we're allowing this during the regular season, we're allowing hunters to now take antlerless deer with modern firearms instead of just muzzleloaders. Success rates are likely to be higher, right? Fill rates will likely be higher. We still maintain complete control, you as the board, maintain complete control of the number of permits that we give out every year. If we want to reduce the antlerless harvest, we still can do that. We just issue fewer permits. Very likely, we will be issuing in most units, in most years, fewer permits than we do now because success rates will be higher. But we need the ability in those occasional years when we need to reach, we need to be able to get there. Rifle hunters are the way we're going to get there. So how do hunters feel about this? Based on the survey we did this past spring, we have considerably more support than opposition. We're just shy of 50% support. There's a pretty good group of people that were neutral. And then, you know, almost just, I think it's 49% and 39% are where those numbers worked out to. And I want to break this down a little to kind of show where this is coming from. Hunters who only hunt the regular season, actually more supportive of this change than hunters who currently have an option to take an antlerless deer in some other season. Kind of like when we legalized crossbows last time, 50 plus hunters who could already use crossbows, very opposed to other people using it. People who only hunt rifle season, the majority of them support this change.
Nick, with this, knowing during rifle season, we have to go to the check station, this also give you more data?
It would,
those come in?
It would definitely boost our data on does and fawns. Yep, which would be helpful actually. Because currently we get a fair number from youth weekend, but you know, it's 300 to 400 maybe a year, and it'd be nice to have 1,000 pages. So it'd be great for us. And it's not a reason to do it at all, but it is a benefit.
Definitely benefit them.
So yeah, hunters who only hunt the regular season, strongly supportive. The age breakdown is the more impressive difference. So young hunters, the darker green, under 55, most hunters strongly support. Hunters over 65, pretty strongly opposed. I left the 55 to 65 out. They're kind of intermediate. They're about split 40% each. But just to demonstrate, it is primarily older hunters that remain opposed to this. And that makes sense. As Neil alluded to, those are the hunters who were alive the last time and old enough to be hunting the last time you could shoot antlerless deer during rifle season. And for most of their life, it has been illegal. Not just like we don't want to do it. The legislature banned this in the late 80s, and that ban remained in effect until 2015. So whether we wanted to or not, we could not have done this until the last 10 years. And the last round of changes, there was still more opposition than support. So support has been growing over time. But the age thing makes sense. But I did want to point that out. Yeah, and so the last thing I'll say on this, I think, is, again, we're at a point where totally understand the concerns of people who lived through the 80s. But we really don't have another choice. And by doing it with our antlerless permits, not only are we giving an opportunity to a large group of our hunters that doesn't currently exist, right? More than a third of our hunters cannot shoot antlerless deer. We're going to give them that opportunity, which is great. But we really we need this. We cannot continue to kind of work around the edges, and we may not need it every year, but we still maintain complete control. This just sort of takes the handcuffs off and lets us manage deer however we need to manage deer.
But if we did pass this, you say we have to wait 5 years before we changed it.
I mean, we don't have to wait any period of time. Generally, yes, we like to have a period of time after a series of rule changes to understand what happened. I think the key part is we still control the number of permits. If the success rates and the harvest rates are way higher than we think they were going to be, we just reduce the number of permits. I mean, we can back way off on the permit numbers if that is actually the case. And we control that every year. So there's easy control here. It's not like, we're going to massacre the deer.
What you said made me ask that question about, while we're on this too, so if this passed, you could also, if you shot it, fill the tag, don't tag in rifle season, you could apply for another one. So if it's unallocated and shoot another doe during rifle, again? Or as many as you want up till your limit?
As we have written it in the rule, and we'll go through the language, but yes, if there are unallocated permits, just like you can now in muzzleloader season, you would be able to get another permit and fill that. My hope, and I suspect with that much larger pool of potential permit holders, maybe not the first year, but eventually people are going to figure out that permits are hard to come by because there's a lot of people trying to get them. Everyone's going to be getting them through the lottery. There likely won't be a lot of unallocated permits, if any, in most units in most years. Hopefully. There may still be some, and that brings us, good segue. Well, it'll be the next change, but this one is related. If we allow antlerless deer to be taken during the rifle season, the closure of archery season during the rifle season, which is currently in place. So currently, archery season runs right up to the regular season, and then it's closed during the regular season, and then it starts again the day after the regular season. The reason for this closure was primarily a law enforcement concern about people taking antlerless deer by archery, which would be allowed if archery was open during the regular season when antlerless deer cannot otherwise be taken. Just to avoid any potential issues there, we said, well, let's just close archery. But if we're taking antlerless deer during the regular season, there's no reason for archery to be closed. It's just like every other season, like the December, like either of our muzzleloader seasons, like youth weekend, just run archery straight through it. Obviously, most hunters, given a choice, are going to choose to rifle hunt over archery hunt. But there will be a few diehards who want to go out and bow hunt or antlerless deer. So it just simplifies the regulations.
So you could shoot a buck during the regular season, then come back out with your bow, right? So you get it first weekend, so you can go back out with your bow and take a doe with an archery tag.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, it's the same situation we have again during the December muzzleloader season, during the October muzzleloader season, overlapping seasons, right? It's not an issue anywhere we allow it currently. Anywhere we allow antlerless deer to be taken, it was only a potential law enforcement concern here, so just closed it out of simplicity. But to make things simpler, and this is something that confuses the heck out of hunters too, because you can use a bow during the regular season. Just to make everything simpler, we recommend that this just go away. Archery runs right through the regular season. Keep things simple.
Now, is that contingent on?
That's contingent on the antlerless permitting. Yes, yes, those are very much related. The next one gets more to Paul's point, adjusting how many antlerless permits a hunter can hold at a time. So we're recommending that we now allow hunters to hold up to 2. Again, this is obviously assuming we would still have some version of unallocated antlerless permits. But under this thing, this version, you'd still, as a hunter, only be able to acquire 1 permit through the lottery. So that ensures that everyone gets a chance at 1 before anyone can get 2, right? So 1 through the lottery, and that includes the landowner lottery, that's all together. And then if there are unallocated permits, you can purchase 1 without filling your first tag, but it has to be in a different WMU. You can only hold 1 per WMU at a time. The reason to keep it to 1 per WMU and to have a total cap of 2 is so people don't hoard permits that they don't intend to use. But the logic here, and so this map, oh, none of you paid enough attention to remember this, but I showed this map in April as part of, or May, as part of our last year's antlerless recommendation. This was my guess at which units would have leftover antlerless permits where we wouldn't sell all of the permits. Every one of those did not sell all of the permits. There were leftover permits at the end of the year. But I use it here to as an example, and I'll use K as an example because I live in K. So a hunter applies for a permit in I because that's where they hunt maybe most of the time. So they wanted a permit there. But then I invite them down to my place in K to hunt where there are almost 1,000 leftover antlerless permits, and they can't buy one, even though they're coming to my place to hunt, and I would like them to fill in antlerless deer tag. That's the issue we're trying to resolve with this. basically we want any hunter who is able to hunt in a unit with unallocated permits to be able to buy one of those unallocated permits. So that's what we're trying to solve while keeping some kind of cap in place to avoid, again, people eventually hoarding permits.
And so Nick, in O, which is the lower half of O is what I represent. If in fact there's an unissued doe permit, a hunter from somewhere else is willing to come down at the landowner's request, they can simply purchase an unallocated doe permit and hunt that land.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
do you
hunters
think
can do that now? The only difference is right now we require a hunter to fill their first antlerless permit before they can acquire another unallocated one. What we're saying is you don't have to fill your first one as long as it's in a different WMU. You can go there. If you get a chance to hunt there, by all means, buy a permit, try to use it.
But you still could get a
well,
second one.
there's also the whole larger conversation about whether how the department is supporting the landowner hunter brokerage service, if you will, because this certainly would play into it and make it much more flexible for a landowner to invite a hunter onto their land when they're facing a deer browse situation in terms of regeneration. And so,
yeah, sure.
And
I think it gives them that option, another option.
If that plays out as a statistical biologist, do you think that would really have an impact on the overbrowse issue, or could it have an impact?
I don't think so. This one's a little tricky because again, I hope there are no unallocated permits. Assuming the rifle antlerless or the regular season antlerless permit thing goes through, my hope is there are no more unallocated permits. We're able to distribute all of them to the lottery because, David, the best thing, better than having a hunter from somewhere else come down to O and hunt a place they don't know, is to have someone local who knows where the deer are hunt those areas. So the more permits we can give to local people who maybe only rifle hunt, the much better off we're going to be. That's going to have the bigger impact. If there are still unallocated permits under that system, then yes, this is a great way to get them used.
Okay, and then this rule is also allowing the taking of doe during rifle season with a permit.
Yeah, I mean, not this particular change, but the previous change we discussed, yes. That is part of the overall rule change, is allowing taking of does during the rifle season with a permit.
Right. Thank you.
That applies to muzzle loader as well, right? That's the same permit.
It's the same permit. Yes. You could use it in either of the muzzleloader seasons or the regular season. But one deer per permit. So this change, and then I think this is the last one. We're recommending that we allow hunters to take a conditional second buck. So currently, hunters are allowed $1 statewide all seasons, $1 per year. That is actually very popular among hunters. Hunters really like that. But it does create a few challenges. It does limit how much some hunters hunt. And so I think there's opportunity here for us to provide some additional opportunity for hunters while maintaining the things we like about a $1 limit. So the biggest complaint we hear, I hear this a lot, particularly from archery hunters, is that with a $1 limit, they don't archery hunt anymore. They used to, but they don't, ostensibly because they don't want to have to choose between, a nice buck walks out. They don't want to have to choose between shooting that buck and giving up rifle season, or passing a nice buck in Vermont, which is a rare opportunity. So instead they just don't hunt or hunt much less. I think there's a former deer biologist in our Northeast Deer Technical Committee, which is all the deer biologists in the Northeast and Eastern Canada. Former biologist from West Virginia. We would have this debate all the time about limiting buck harvest as a way of trying to shift people toward antlerless deer. And he would always say that, you know, there are a lot of hunters willing to shoot an antlerless deer, but the buck tag is what gets them in the woods. They're not going to go hunting if they don't have a buck tag. And I don't totally agree with that, but there is some truth to it. We've seen it in our October muzzleloader season. Participation is considerably lower than it is in December. So there is some truth to that. Giving hunters or ensuring they have a buck tag, and there's an option for them to pretty much always have a buck tag, does help get them in the field where they might shoot antlerless deer. So our conditions on this second buck, you can take a second buck if purchase a second buck tag. Your first buck has at least 3 points on one side. So regardless of which unit you're in, what your antler restriction is, if you want to qualify for the second buck, your first buck has to have 3 points on one side, and you have to harvest an antlerless deer. So the second buck would be your third total deer. A lot of hunters aren't going to be interested in that. A lot of hunters aren't willing to take an antlerless deer, so they're not going to qualify. My best guess, based on in the last few years, the hunters that would meet these qualifications, and assuming normal success rate on a second buck, is that this would result in about 75 people taking a second buck in a year. Minimal, probably negligible impact on the buck harvest, but it incentivizes antlerless deer harvest, gets those hunters afield, provides additional opportunity, and at least maintains, if not increases, the selectivity from the 1 buck limit on that first buck, right? Hunters are going to be a little pickier maybe on that first buck if they know there's a potential second buck out or second buck tag available out there. So that's the thought here. Pretty simple opportunity, minimal, negligible cost with some potential benefits.
Fred?
Yeah, a quick question, Nick. So in this scenario here, will all these deer be reported at a reporting station?
I'm glad you brought that up, Brad. So one of the, and this is not a rule change, which is why I didn't mention it, but one of the things that would probably come along with this is we've been debating this anyway, but if someone reports a deer online, we are probably going to start requiring them to provide a picture. So it would either, yes, it's either in person where there's in theory a third person verification that what you are saying it is what it is. Or if they report online, they will have to upload a picture so that we have that sort of verification that what they're saying they did is actually what they did.
I would love to see all three of them reported in person, to tell you the truth. I'd love to see, I don't know how you're going to be able to tell a doe from a doe from a doe. You know, if someone just puts a picture of a doe up there just to be able to shoot a second buck. And I know that that's not a wide, I know that's not a widespread issue, but I think we're setting ourselves up for that to become an issue.
So Brad, the requirements of if you submit a picture online, part of the requirement is that your tag is visible with the date and your name and all that information on that. I know people can fake things, but there's also information on a picture, on a photo about when it was taken in the metadata. So there's a lot of ways we can kind of potentially enforce issues there, but I really don't think it's a serious concern if we're requiring photos. I think we can work around this pretty easily.
First, in regards to Brad's question, during rifle season, don't they all have to be reported?
In rifle season, they currently all have to be reported in person.
Which would solve the problem he's talking about.
During rifle season, but if someone shoots their first buck during archery season,
Okay, yes.
And we may not be able to continue the rifle season requirement either, because reality is we're losing reporting stations in some areas.
Mention that there's only one.
Yeah.
In the Bennington area,
Bennington's a problem.
Arlington.
I like,
Closes at 3:30.
I like the thought of this. The only problem I have with it is if the person is not fortunate enough to draw an antlerless tag, he misses this opportunity.
Right.
So it's kind of not necessarily fair for.
Correct. There are some folks who, I mean, we cannot guarantee an antlerless harvest opportunity for everyone. So there is that, but.
Well, so during archery season, so
if you bow hunt, you always have this opportunity, right? But for someone, say, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. Even though I buy an archery license, I typically only hunt regular season and muzzleloader season. If I don't draw an antlerless permit, which I live in K, so that's not an issue. But if I didn't draw an antlerless permit, there would be no way for me to qualify for a second buck, right? Because that's my only way to kill an antlerless deer in the seasons that I hunt. So yeah, there are people who won't draw an antlerless permit and will not have an option for this.
So if I harvest a buck to 8 point during archery season, use my archery tag, buy another archery tag, harvest a doe. Now, do I still have my rifle buck tag?
No. We're going to change that too.
Okay.
Yeah. So that, again, what we call tagging is weird, and there's actually no rules about what we call a tag and what deer it goes on. Interestingly, but so since that was the last slide I have, I will show this slide. So proposed changes to our tags, because our tags do not currently match our hunting license, our hunting season structure. These are the tags you would currently get, deer tags you would currently get, right? Right now you get a rifle buck tag, you get your archery tag, you get a muzzleloader tag, and an antlerless permit if you get one. If you kill a deer, if you kill a buck with during any season, rifle season or archery season, you just invalidated some of your tags. That is a weird thing to have. Most states don't have any system where you can use one of your tags and now some of your other ones are invalid unless you've reached a bag limit. But this shouldn't really, it doesn't make sense. We changed rules since this structure. So because we can just rename tags, what we're talking about right now, none of this is guaranteed, but your rifle buck tag becomes a buck tag. That's how most states issue buck tags. You buy a hunting license, you get a buck tag. If you buy an archery license, you can hunt archery season, but if you shoot a buck in archery season, you still use your buck tag. Archery tag becomes then an archery antlerless tag, because that's really all it's good for. Muzzleloader permit doesn't exist. Muzzleloader tag doesn't exist because it's just a buck tag. And you already have one of those. Obviously, antlerless permit, we get rid of the word muzzleloader. And then there's a second buck tag. So your tags will look a little different, but they'll make sense with what our season structure is and will be, but even is now. So just some simple changes, but yeah, there won't be a way for you to do what you said and say, oh yeah, I still have my rifle buck tag, which is currently the case. You still have your rifle buck tag, even if you shoot an archery deer, but it's not valid currently. And it wouldn't be valid, wouldn't exist in this new system. Anyway.
Could I technically shoot 3 deer during rifle season now though?
You could shoot 4 deer if they're unallocated.
Unallocated
permits.
yes.
You could shoot
They
your bag limit, they could all be during rifle season if they're unallocated permits and you're that efficient that you can kill a deer, buy another tag, and yeah.
I get all that.
Yeah, but only one buck can be taken per season.
Only 1 buck per season. And that's, yes, that's important aspect of that second buck part is only 1 per season.
Okay, that's what I was kind of.
Yes, so no.
I killed 2 bucks during rifle.
No, only 1 per season.
Okay.
Yeah, don't get into details. If you're a bow hunter, you could take 1 during archery during that window. Not important, but so I guess questions before we get into the language, which this rule is a whole lot of corrected language. So
yeah, I got it. So the others, the early and late muzzleloader seasons remain the same as far as length, and what about opening up the early muzzleloader season now for what are?
So I don't think we're interested at this point in anything that potentially increases our buck harvest, and that absolutely would. It'd be the first opportunity to shoot bucks with a gun. It would definitely increase the buck harvest. And most of what we're talking about right now is trying to restrict our buck harvest so we can continue to meet our age structure
but
goals.
If you're not an archer, they got a lot better chance to harvest more antlerless and an additional buck.
They do, and I absolutely get I guess I'll call it a fairness equity argument about archers have a lot more opportunity, but frankly, we give them that additional opportunity because they are by far a better antlerless deer management tool. They're the best tool we have for managing antlerless deer. So we do kind of prioritize archery hunting. And I wish in an ideal world we could give everyone all the opportunities, but we still do have to restrict our antlerless harvest enough that we can't give everyone those opportunities. And because we have age structure goals for bucks, we have to restrict our buck harvest to continue to meet those goals. I mean, it's hard to justify, reinstating an antler restriction while at the same time adding a season when you can shoot bucks. You're kind of counteracting each other.
I've always advocated for that when there was a one buck rule. I spoke to you about that many times, but so for clarification too, if you shot a spike corn or whatever is legal in your unit first, then you've lost your chance for a second buck.
Correct.
But you didn't lose the opportunity, Paul. It's later, not earlier.
No, your first buck.
Your first buck's gotta have more than 3.
I understand that, but if you shoot one, not the second part of his question, but the first part of his question, like making the muzzleloader season, early muzzleloader season open to buck harvest,
right?
It's the same thing. You just have to wait until December. You just can't do it in October. If you shot a 3-point on one side in rifle season, you get a second buck tag for muzzleloader season.
Yeah, shoot a dog.
Right. It's the same opportunity. It's just later, not early.
Yeah, shoot a dog.
You do have to still shoot a dog. Yeah. And again, vast majority of hunters are never going to qualify for any of it because they're not going to shoot the first buck. But very few hunters are even going to qualify to try to get that second buck. Right? It's not. But what it does is it sort of dangles a carrot out there. That if you're, a little selective on your first one, if you're out bow hunting and you see that doe, you're gonna be like, well, I'm gonna fill my doe tag. So now if I see a nice buck, now I'm all set for my second buck. It incentivizes things we want to incentivize: antlerless harvest and selectivity on our buck harvest.
Brad?
Marty?
Brad, you're muted.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the equity between bow hunters and rifle hunters, but you kind of addressed why that inequity exists because of their success rate. But are the number of does that they harvest every year fairly consistent? Bow hunters?
Yes, it fluctuated a lot the first few years after COVID, after we changed the regulation. I think largely due to COVID and the effects of that on participation, but historically and in the last couple of years, yes, it is quite consistent. The archery antlerless harvest.
Yeah, I think they're getting archery hunters are getting 2 big wins out of this, or 2 big ones. I mean, the ability to get the second and automatically built into their process a chance at a second buck where rifle hunters aren't. And secondly, the extension of their season right through ours. I mean, those are 2 biggies. So anyway, I'm just thinking through those 2 and what the impact of those 2 might have.
That's why I was suggesting that shoot at a good buck during early muzzleloader. Saw a 6-pointer. The early muzzleloader gives you that opportunity to.
I will add on the early muzzleloader thing. I mean, this came up 6 years ago when we were discussing the 2020 changes. Why not allow bucks then? A big reason, aside from not wanting to increase our buck harvest. No, it sounds terrible to say, but that's the reality of where we're managing. We don't actually want to increase our buck harvest. We also do sort of value I'll say the sanctity of the regular season. That is the priority for most Vermont hunters. If we allow even a 4-day muzzleloader buck season early, it really does take away the value of rifle season, right? The value of that is it's your first chance to shoot bucks with a gun. That's a huge part of the value of that season. And if we add an earlier gun season, even though it's muzzleloader, it does take away from that. And our hunters still very much prioritize rifle season over everything else. So that is the other reason.
Let's get to Marty first.
Oh,
Marty? You're muted.
You shoot your 6-pointer during archery season and your doe by your second buck tag, and that's good for rifle and muzzleloader.
Correct.
Late muzzleloader.
Late muzzleloader, yes. Okay. I do hear a lot from the archers that they have quit hunting because of, the 1 buck rule anyway. So, and I know they would be hunting more and get out there more too, just from my experience. Thank you.
Under these new rules, if they were to pass, this, you may have already covered this and I missed it. The first buck, take that during rifle season, and then if you've already shot it out, so you could shoot conceivably 2 buck during.
No, still 1 per season.
1 buck per season.
No more than 1 buck per season. So the only way you can do this, the 2 buck thing, is if you hunt multiple seasons.
So you could shoot it during
The late muzzleloader.
You could shoot it in the late muzzleloader season.
or bull.
Yeah.
Okay. Since it came up, if the success rate hasn't changed for muzzleloader season in the antlerless deer, is there any talk of doing away with that early muzzleloader season? Just go late?
I mean, we've talked about it, but I will say it is popular among the hunters that hunt it. We're killing those antlerless deer 6 to 8 weeks sooner than we would have been killing them. That is valuable, right? That's a lot of food that's there for the deer that are actually going to go in the winter. So there is value in keeping that season.
Okay.
I mean, in an ideal world, we do most of our antlerless harvest in October if we could. But the challenge is most of our hunters don't have time to hunt in October. Not much we can do. But yeah, so there's value in keeping.
Okay.
Marty, did you have another question or is your hand still up? Yeah.
No, I'm done. Yeah.
I do have a question. This is Allison. I'm not sure if maybe you guys can't see my hand raised.
Oh.
I just wanted to comment and again on the second buck tag. I totally understand the reasoning. I guess I feel the same feelings Brad was expressing. Nick, your reasoning behind it is absolutely solid and makes logical sense to me, where the goal is to get hunters, archery hunters in particular, back into the woods with the goal of increasing the antlerless harvest. That all makes sense to me, but I just feel like when we take this to the public, it's going to be really controversial, and I feel like it's a bit onerous. You've said we don't need to we don't need to increase the buck harvest, and I get that the goal is to increase the antlerless harvest. I don't know that that's going to convey well to the public. So when we get to the rule changes, I will probably be opposed to that one. That being said, I do get that we can take this to the public, get public feedback, and then make a decision as well. So thanks.
Yeah. Before 2019, you could take 2 buck, right? Correct. Could you take 2 in 1 season? No. Okay. So we're kind of reverting back to that, just in a little more, here's a carrot, get a bigger buck.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of reverting back to that, but I don't know. I view it being very different from just an open, you can take 2 bucks. If we were killing 600 some odd hunters, we're taking 2 bucks under the previous. And it was, it had to be in separate seasons, but otherwise just take your 2 bucks. Like I said, this is going to have little, if any, impact on our buck harvest. There'll be a handful of hunters that do take 2 bucks, but the selectivity on the front end may cancel that out. So, and I also understand Allison's point about, this is a little confusing to the public. It's gonna sound like we're allowing a second buck, so we're gonna increase the buck harvest, but then we're saying we're not trying to increase the buck harvest. I get that argument too. Yeah, I think this is, while I understand the perception, it seems like we're just going back to $2 with a little nuance to it. I don't know. As a deer manager, I find it to be a very different system than an open $2 system.
That second buck has to be the third deer, and you've proven over many seasons how few people get 3 deer. I mean,
Yeah, well, very few get 3 deer, and frankly, I mean, I don't have a slide for it, but we asked how many deer people want to shoot. If they could, unlimited. If you were the perfect deer hunter, how many deer would you want to shoot a year? We asked that in our hunter survey, and I think it was 12% wanted 3 or more. So most hunters have no interest in shooting 3+ deer. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is a lot of complication for not enough gain. I don't know, but I feel like it's a valuable kind of carrot to put out there. And like Marty said, I've heard the same thing. A lot of archery hunters that really aren't hunting because of the $1 limit. We can get them a field. And I will also add, our muzzleloader license sales dropped considerably, pretty much because of the $1 limit, right? People aren't going to buy their muzzleloader license until they know they didn't shoot a buck, at least the ones who only hunt December. So we can bump those back up a little bit too. That'd be great.
And just for clarification, you're suggesting that they can shoot the doe first and then
they can shoot the doe first. Yes. The order does not matter.
As long as the first buck is the bigger one. Or
as long as the first buck meets those qualifications. Sorry. Your second buck, I don't care because so few people are going to be getting. Makes sense.
no restrictions on that.
No other than the normal antler restrictions.
I was speaking with someone last month who loved to muzzleload hunt. They like doing it on snow. The way the last several seasons have been, they don't get much snow until late. One of their thoughts was if we ended muzzleloading like on December 15th every year,
I have seen that suggestion. So I would say in terms of the late muzzleloader season, I would not again, right now, I wouldn't really be interested in, I would argue against it. I don't think it's not opposed to any extension of the December muzzleloader season. In theory, I think eventually we'll get there for sure. Right now, I would be apprehensive only because, like I said, I think just like the October one, it would increase our buck harvest. Right now, late December season, we're killing about 50 some bucks a day during the week. During weekdays, a lot more on the weekends, but during those weekdays, so potentially adding even 5 weekdays, which is the most it would do. I think in some years, you're killing 200, potentially additional 250 additional bucks, maybe. Some of that might be not.
This season didn't make any difference because it ended the 15th anyway.
Right, and that so the 15th thing, I don't think it wouldn't be my recommendation. My suggestion would be maybe to fill in the gap week right after rifle season.
Yeah.
So it's consistent. It's the same length every year. You wouldn't want a season that varied from whatever it would be, like 9 days to 16 days. So yeah,
Middle of the week.
There'd be a lot of variation in that season. That would be pain, but infilling that gap week, that gives you the same season. I mean, again, right now I'd be apprehensive just because of the increase in the buck harvest, but not opposed to that.
Are overall hunting license numbers stable or are they trending lower? What are we seeing there? Because that
I think participation is pretty stable right now. Yeah, and again, we've seen that drop in muzzleloader because of the $1 limit. You know that also by the timing of when people are buying their muzzleloader license. Everyone used to buy it up front. And now they're waiting.
Right.
So
just to follow up on Bob's point, extending the season, much like we did with the archery season, yes, it could increase the buck harvest. It would also increase the antlerless harvest.
right? Potentially, but again, for the October season didn't increase it. It just spread it out. And so I guess you could make that argument for the December buck harvest potentially as well. It may not increase it. It might just spread out our existing December buck harvest over a longer season. Part of why I'm not really I'm not opposed to that. I'm just a little apprehensive at this point about anything that potentially increases our buck harvest when we're trying to be restrictive. Any more questions before we get into the real boring part of this? So a lot of the changes in this were just trying to make this rule a little cleaner. It has been changed a lot over the years and have gotten a little messy. So striking 3.2 defines what an antlerless permit is. That's defined in the next section. So it didn't need to be there anymore. Now we've added this section 4, which defines what an antlerless deer permit is, how they're issued, and when they can be used. This language, most of it comes directly from statute, from 4081G. 4081G sets the antlerless permit lottery. That is the only way we are allowed to distribute antlerless permits. That is set in statute. We are putting all of that language in the rule with my personal long-term goal of removing that from statute so that we don't have that handcuff in statute anymore. But for now, we're just copying language from statute. So it's all in the rule. So yeah, this doesn't change anything about how we operate the lottery currently. It's just copied from statute. 4.3 is the bit that tries to describe how a person can hold 2 antlerless permits at a time, only one of which may be acquired pursuant to sections 4.2 A or B, which is the lottery. No person may purchase or possess more than 1 antlerless permit for an individual wildlife management unit at one time. And then clarifying that after you've harvested an antlerless deer, you can purchase another subsequent antlerless permit. Obviously up to the annual limit. We actually don't prevent someone from buying another permit after they've reached the antlerless limit, but they can't use it. But if they want to give us money and buy it, they can.
So somebody could fill one permit in one unit, and that same day go to the next unit, next door and shoot another one, same day.
Yeah. I mean, currently people do that in the same unit. You can shoot a deer,
you can. But now you can't hold 2 in the same unit.
You can't, but you can shoot one if they're unallocated in your unit. Like for example, I'm in K. I can shoot a doe, go report it, go buy I can do this all right on my phone while still sitting in my stand, buy another permit, and then shoot another deer.
I gotta get a smartphone.
But yeah, so currently someone can do that all in one unit. Section, what is now section 5, annual deer limit. 5B is where we lay out the conditional second buck part. So previously we had an exception in there for youth and novice hunters, which is 5.1A is the youth and novice hunter exception. 5.1B lays out the bit about you can take an additional buck, not to exceed the annual limit, if you purchase your second tag. Take and report an antlerless deer and take and report a buck with 3 points on a side. And then 5.2 is some language that had previously been, and you'll see where this is struck later, but had previously been in under a couple other seasons, but not all of them, about which just
clarifying that you can't take deer in a WMU unless you are licensed, permitted, or explicitly authorized to do so by the board, or procedures adopted, which antlerless permits are procedure, which is why this is procedure. So this is just putting this up here in the bag limit section, so it applies to all seasons. Section 6, regular season. This is, nothing has changed. Generally here, just the wording, try to keep each season to have the same sort of format where there's first describes the season date and then describes the bag limit. So a lot of these text changes are just trying to put every season in the same format. So season dates. There is a statute that describes the regular season. It has to be at least 16 days and it has to include Thanksgiving by statute. It's for a very long time now been 16 days starting 12 days prior to Thanksgiving. We do have some authority to move that around, but we're not trying to do that.
It's kind of in line with what we're talking about right now. It was allowing rifles during muzzleloader to take an antlerless deer considered the later season.
Rifles during the December
muzzleloader
season
to fill your antlerless tag.
No, I cannot say that was one that we actually considered. That would be a little awkward if we were just doing it for antlerless at that point. In December, we did discuss.
It's like using
we did discuss turning the October muzzleloader season into a rifle season for antlerless deer.
Tacking it on at the end would leave the sanctity of deer season intact, I would think.
Oh, you mean just doing all of your rifle antlerless harvest after?
No, sure. Provide more opportunity for the only rifle hunters. Increase your antlerless build rate.
I'm gonna say no. We didn't consider that. I think that would be unnecessary if we're doing it during. We're already doing it during rifle season. I don't think we need more time to fill antlerless.
I think that's gonna get your antlerless kill where you want to be.
Yeah, I agree. I hope, but yeah, I don't think we need. And I will say, the last time we went through this process, extending seasons, like we did a lot of that last time, and we got a lot of pushback, not only from hunters but from non-hunters, landowners in particular, that we're just taking up everything now with hunting seasons, and we do want to be a little sensitive to that. And also, the other reality is hunters only have so much time to hunt. We can extend seasons. We can have endless deer season from October 1st through December. They're still only going to hunt whatever number of days they hunt now. That's the time they have. So we have found that through surveys and through experience that extensions don't really amount to a lot in terms of changing our harvest, but they do tend to start interfering with a lot of other things. There's a lot of, I don't know, the consequences don't necessarily justify the gains we get from it. The season dates, that hasn't changed. That text is the same as what it's always been. And then the limit part, one legal buck, not to exceed the annual limit. I will say that all of these, there is an adjustment we need to make. So all of these refer to the annual limit as prescribed in section 6.1. It's actually section 5.1. We had a different section 5 previously, so our numbers got a little jumbled. But little number change there, but it's referenced a bunch of times. But that should all be 5.1. And then one antlerless deer per antlerless deer permit, again, not to exceed the annual limit. You'll see this repeated again through most of the seasons. Section 7 is the October muzzleloader season. So we had this previously called the antlerless season. That was my own personal hope that eventually we'd use rifles in that season. So I didn't want to call it a muzzleloader season last time. Now I'm just accepting that it is a muzzleloader season. To avoid any confusion, we're just going to call it October muzzleloader season. in rule as well. It's already what we call it in all our reports, and when you're reporting a harvest, we're just going to call it that in rule as well. In season dates, don't really change. You didn't need that line about shall be the antlerless deer season, obviously. And then the limit, even though there's a lot of crossing out here, this essentially says the same thing it says in every other limit section. Person may take one antlerless deer per antlerless deer permit, not to exceed the annual limit as prescribed in section, should be 5.1 of this rule. This and the other muzzleloader season had a bunch of language that is now up in the antlerless permit section about, you know, you can't purchase or possess more than one permit at a time. That's all now covered up in the antlerless permit section earlier in the rule. 7.4, that cross out is just simplifying language. There was some very confusing language. Obviously, you're hunting. It was confusing if you read the whole thing with that first line in there. It wasn't necessary, so check that out. And then what was 5.6 at the bottom that struck out again, that was put up above under the bag limit section, so it wasn't needed here. Section 8, December muzzleloader season. We just added the word December since we now have the October. We want to be consistent there. Season dates, just cross some bits out to make that, again, consistent wording for each section. And then the limit, ultimately, this is the exact same wording as the limit during the regular season, right? One legal buck, not to exceed the annual limit, and one antlerless deer per antlerless deer permit, not to exceed the annual limit. Again, language that wasn't needed, crossed out there on 8.3. 8.4, same thing as above, language, confusing language crossed out. And then this 6.5 also, that was put up above, not needed there. Section 9, archery season. So being consistent, but we're crossing out that except during the regular hunting season. That was functionally what closed archery season during the regular hunting season. So that cross out in 9.1 is what allows archery season to extend through the regular season. 9.2 limit, the buck part's the same as the other seasons. The antlerless part for archery is a little bit different because it's not by antlerless permit, right? So in wildlife management units declared open by the board to the taking of antlerless deer, person may take one antlerless deer per archery antlerless deer tag. Showed you how the tags were gonna, the name of the tags are gonna change a little bit. Not to exceed the annual limit. 9.3, again, just like the other sections, you're hunting under this section, doesn't need to say hunting with a bow and arrow crossbow. What was 7.4 crossed out, just not necessary anymore. That was part of last time when we were allowing crossbows to be used during archery seasons. We added that language. It's covered in other places that you can use crossbows. We did add this section 9.4 because, believe it or not, nothing in here said that you had to use a bow and arrow or crossbow. You could only use a bow and arrow or crossbow. It said you had to buy archery licenses, and there are lots of ways you essentially had to, but it did not specifically say you could only take deer with a bow and arrow or crossbow during this season.
Yeah, I got one question, just sticking with me here.
Yeah.
And 9.2b. Wildlife management is declared open by the board of the taking of antlerless deer. Person may take one antlerless deer per archery antlerless deer tag. We don't have an archery antlerless deer tag, do we? Just, that should be archery tag.
You will by the time this takes effect.
This is my last great meeting.
But yes, if for whatever reason we can't change the name of a tag, which literally we can do nothing that says we can't. Currently, it was just an archery tag. It will be called an archery antlerless tag. The 7.6, the cocked crossbow part, again, we covered that earlier with the moose rule. That will be covered hopefully in statute, so it's not necessary here. Section 9.6 is about expanded archery zones. And then there's a whole bunch about describing the actual boundaries of these zones. I'm not going to walk through all of them. You can, you have issues, by all means, bring them up, but you can read them. What was section 8, what described the regular rifle season. Again, that was put up above, so it's crossed out here, but that was, I listed that as the first season because there are a lot of other seasons that reference rifle season as their base for when the dates are and stuff. So it made sense for rifle season, regular season. No longer call it rifle season. It's regular season to be the first one listed. So it just got moved up. 10 is youth deer hunting weekend. So the important cross out here is we crossed out 3 and replaced it with 1. That moves youth weekend to the weekend immediately prior to the regular season. And again, crossed out rifle, we're just trying to be consistent and call it the regular season, not rifle season. People can still call it rifle season if you want, but in rule and everywhere, it's going to be called the regular season. Novice season, this is just, I think that section reference is wrong. So in 11.1, same as concurrent with youth weekend, that should say in section 10.1, not 11.1, because we're in section 11.1. And 12 on reporting, we added this 12.3. This is, again, the same language that was in the moose rule. Trying to be consistent across rules about you can quarter a deer in the field. So it's this exact same language that was in the moose rule, except the last, I think the last line or two are specific to deer about requiring the central incisors during the, probably should say, regular season and youth and novice weekend. And then I think that was the last changes. We didn't change the last 3 sections other than the numbers. So, any more questions or?
Very good. Oh, Marty.
Yeah, you have a number for rifle antlerless in your head already per zone?
A number, like a number of permits we would issue?
Right.
No, I don't. I mean, I think I haven't got that far, but I think we would assume, you know, we'll discuss this when we discuss antlerless permits, not this year, next year. But I think, you know, we would assume some increase in success rates. Probably, you know, assume something like 20% fill rates, whereas we're at 40% or 14% now. Obviously that would vary by WMU. And we go from there in terms of, you know, how many deer we're trying to kill. But that, I guess I didn't mention this. A lot of our neighbors, a lot of states have an antlerless permitting system like this, right? A lottery antlerless permit system. Most states you can use it in any season, but that's how you get your antlerless deer tag. Massachusetts has a very similar system to this. They have about an 18% success fill rate on those permits. New York's pretty similar, 18 to 20% success rate on those permits. The highest I'm aware of is Pennsylvania, which has about a 25% fill rate on their antlerless permits. So in my view, that is the ceiling. There is about a 0% chance we have a higher success rate than Pennsylvania. So, you know, we're not going to suddenly see 30, 40, 50% fill rates on antlerless permits. They're going to be higher than they are currently, but there's a realistic limit there.
Thank you.
Right. Do we have a motion regarding deer rule change?
I would make a motion to approve the rule changes as presented by.
Second,
Do you want to reference the one change we made to reference 10.1?
Including.
Looks like you said that.
I thought I said that.
Okay. You might have.
I did. It's my list.
Any discussion?
I have a
Brad?
comment. Yes. I was hoping that we would vote on these individually. There are a couple that I have some concerns with. The hunting, the permits, antlerless permits during rifle season. I'm old enough as well to remember what it was like to hunt during that season, and it was definitely a different time. There's no doubt about it, and there were some challenges and some concerns then, and hence that's why it stopped. And I think a lot of the younger folks who voted for being in favor of that didn't experience that yet, and hopefully they don't. But I do have some concerns about that. And secondly, I am not greatly in support of the D1 antler restriction. That again, we're dealing with trying to grow our hunting base, and that's one more reason for younger people we're taking an opportunity away from younger hunters to be able to shoot a spike horn. And first 2 deer I ever shot were spike horns, and I got hooked on hunting by doing that. And I just hate taking that opportunity away from young hunters. And I said the same thing back when we had the initial testimony when we first applied the APR rule. So I really am not in favor of those two. So if we're not voting individually, I probably will not vote in favor of all of it because of those two.
So Allison, before we hear from you, I think for the sake of time, and as we dealt with last meeting, this is the first vote of 3 votes. So if there's something that you don't like in the package that we're voting on now, after it goes to public hearing and the second and third vote, things can be added and removed. So again, I think for the sake of time and ease, and I've also ran out of paper, let's vote on this as one package to then look at it later, if that's makes sense.
I was going to make essentially the same comments as Brad. I was going to ask to go section by section. I recognize how late it is, but I feel the same way pretty strongly about a couple of these. If we're not going to go line by line, that's fine, but I'll be opposed.
Another item, if we vote on this as one, and because there's strong opinions about many sections and it doesn't pass the first vote, what does this screw up as far as the timeline to implementation?
Well, the timeline's pretty tight. In order for the rule to go into effect in time to be published in the digest for next season, I believe that we have to have a rule adopted by September is what I believe is just to make our publication deadlines. There's a little bit of flexibility. We can move quickly. For example, the filing deadline for ICAR is actually next Monday. So if you do vote to move this rule forward, it'll go to ICAR in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. Public meetings will be the end of May, I believe.
March.
Yeah,
Really?
early May, end of April, right? So it is possible we could still make the deadline if you don't vote on this until next month.
Well,
We
okay.
don't have a meeting.
And-
so-
Oh, okay.
Right.
So if you don't vote on it until the middle of April, we'd be much closer. Particularly given the number of comments I expect we'll get, the response summary and the subsequent board discussion before there's a second vote it's going to be a substantial discussion.
And regardless, we do have a motion in front of us. So we will have to vote on
No question for
all of them.
if this for some reason doesn't pass as a whole, I think it probably will. But if it doesn't, can we go back and revote individual rules?
So what we have to file with ICAR and then the Secretary of State will be the rule as a whole with whatever changes the board approves today. If after the public notice and comment period, we decide to make additional substantial changes, we will likely need to go through notice again. So you can make small changes based on public feedback, but if, for example, we don't approve a second buck right now, and we decide later to do that, the public process requires that there be another public notice period to consider that brand new proposal. That was a complicated answer. Essentially,
Yeah.
if we, oh yeah,
I think Neil is asking if they don't approve it as presented by Nick right now, does that stick them to that, or can they make changes tonight?
Can we go?
Individually?
In other words, if
Can
we
we
got,
take
we've got
another
a motion to approve this as a package, if it doesn't pass, can somebody make a motion that we go through individually
Yes.
and make them changes tonight?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Can I just point out, for the sake of continuity, y'all did this a month ago with all of the fish regs.
Thank you.
And it was brought up that if you vote for it now, it goes out to public opinion and you get input from the public on the department's recommendation. Don't do that. They're never going to see those recommendations. They will only see what you vote on tonight.
You strike something tonight, we will not present it to the public. There will be no public comment on
I gotta say, I don't disagree with you, Brad and Allison. We're kind of playing reverse roles here for the last time with the fish. I don't disagree with you. I don't know that I support those either. But I'd like to see the public comment on this because I think that's gonna really be a gauge. Not that I'll be here to vote, but I think that's really gonna be a gauge. I think you're gonna have some pretty interesting public meetings.
Yeah, good point, Jay. That was literally reverse of last meeting because I was the one who made the same point. So point taken. Worth considering for sure.
I will just add that I have the same feeling toward these that I did during the fish regulation, that by passing it and putting it out there, I don't think we're giving the public a true representation of how the board feels on it. If we're only voting in order to get it out there for the public to see it, I think it's a little misleading that we're showing a 14-0 vote if, in fact, we're not solidly behind the recommendation. That's the only concern I have with that approach.
I have the same concern, Brad. It sort of sounds like there's a majority that's going to pass the whole thing. And if we're concerned about that and we're the two dissenting voices, perhaps that helps illustrate that there was significant conversation and questions and concerns about some of this.
Yeah, I'm personally
Still saying
fine.
to me 14-0. David?
It just occurs to me that the Vermont Hunting and fishing community does not need an indication from the board to help them decide whether they agree or disagree with a draft proposal that is being put forward. Folks are going to weigh in regardless. The thing is that this is, if you will, a procedural vote to begin the process. And I think it would be unfortunate to sort of reject the work that's gone into this. We'll have a chance to do this line by line, but I'll tell you, at 9:15 at night, I don't want to start that on a 10-page document. So I'm prepared to support this as a procedural vote to move it forward and begin the public process.
That being said, any more comments? Good for a roll call vote? Brad, you wanted to say something?
No, I don't want to prolong this anymore. My question was that if we do go to public hearing, and I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. I'm ready to vote.
Yeah. Yes is to approve the recommendations with the one change as presented by the department. Brian?
Yes.
Nicholas?
Yes.
David?
Yes, and my vote is a procedural vote to move this forward, and I ask that the minutes reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth?
Yes.
Brad?
No.
Allison?
Yes, and like David, I'd like the minutes to reflect that it's a procedural yes.
Okay. Neil?
I'll vote yes in the same manner. Procedural vote.
Linda?
Yes, and I'll do the same manner as the others with the procedural vote, please.
Paul?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes, with a procedural vote to wait to see what the public says.
Richard?
Yes.
I'm a yes. All right, passes 13-1. All right, thank you, Nick, for that, all of that.
Yeah.
More to come.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot more. I know there's a lot of them.
All right, on to the commissioner's update.
Recognizing the time, I just want to take a moment to thank Brian, Michael, and Jay for all of the time, energy, and just effort that you put into being on the board for the last 6 years. As we've seen today, can be a lot of time, sometimes tedious, but I know that the things that you've gone through in the past 6 years on the board have been a lot, and it has really helped shape Vermont's fish and wildlife, and we really appreciate all of the things you've put into stewarding and help managing our population. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have seen the deer rule go for full circle in our 6 years. Before we adjourn, would Brian or
Mr.
Jay like
Chairman?
to?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, David.
I know that this is, it may sound like an unusual procedure, but in the legislature, if someone says something on the floor that is of note, a member can rise and ask that the member's remarks be journalized. And in this case, I would ask the minutes to reflect the remarks of the commissioner for the board members, so that her remarks, recognizing the work that they've done, appears in the minutes.
I think that can be done. Good, Abigail. Thank you, David.
Yes, sir.
Brian, Jay, would you like
A few words, you're gonna make me sad, huh? I'll try to keep it short, very short and sweet. I have enjoyed the last 6 years. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to work with first the board members, but definitely with the department. And the work that you all do is incredible, and I appreciate it very much, and I thank you for all that you do for all of us in the state of Vermont. It's very, very impressive what everybody here does, and greatly appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Next, Brian.
Actually, I'll go because I know you're going to say something different. So I'm just going to echo exactly what Brian said. First 6 years goes by really fast. But I think if I could, I would re-up for another 6, maybe after a break. But I think the biggest takeaway out of everything that we've done for the past 6 years is it just blows me away how much the department does, and what we see once a month is only a fraction of what you all do. So it's really given me a true appreciation for what goes through every year. Before I was on this board, I'd see the rule book and I thought it was a pretty simple thing, but it's not. So thank you to the department for the expertise, the coordination of everything. It's truly appreciated.
Yeah, are you still recording? The work that goes into this, you know, when I got into this process, I was a little apprehensive as to what it involved, but you know, with Lewis Porter, Chris Herrick, and Commissioner Shorsley here, it's just phenomenal the work that goes into this, that people have no clue, absolutely clueless as to what goes on. And you know, the people behind the scenes, you're just rock star. I mean, Abigail, man, she's God bless. If they could clone you, we'd make $1 million. And especially the, you know, looking around the wardens, you know, I was in law enforcement for 35 years. The absolute toughest job I think in the world is being a fish and wildlife warden. And we're making these rules. These guys go to enforce. And I think they do just an outstanding job. Congratulations on your upcoming retirement.
Yeah.
God bless you, man, and you made it. But just a thank you, because the board wouldn't be able to do what they do without all of you giving us this information and support to do this. So everything we do for the fish and wildlife and hunters and fishermen and trappers in Vermont is because of what you do. And we're just kind of a messenger in between here. Glad to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you all get an honorable discharge. Hear that,
David? We have a motion to adjourn.
Yes, I heard that.
I'll second it. My last second.
All in favor?
Aye.
For all the board members, Lieutenant Scott has copies of Title 10 for you, hard copies if you want one. Right behind you.